Chapter 1. Gravis, why do you want to become strong? The last light of dusk was shining through the open window into an enormous bedroom. A young boy, no older than 12, was sitting on the ground while looking at his father. His father also sat on the ground facing his son. The boy's usually curious black eyes seemed unsure. The boy wore a white shirt and black cloth pants, and his build was average for a child. One could not see anything out of the ordinary, except for one thing. He wore a dark black ring on his right ring finger. The ring had a design that made it look like obsidian, which had not completely hardened yet. Other than the ring, the boy seemed incredibly plain. His father, on the other hand, was the total opposite. His chiseled and imposing face could make anyone cower in fear and respect. He had the same black eyes as his son, but the feeling they gave was entirely different. In front of those eyes, it felt as if all secrets were laid bare. He wore imposing black and gold robes and an identical-looking ring to his son's. He looked into the boy's eyes. After a while, the boy looked away from his father, his eyes drifting to one of the windows. To protect the people close to me. The boy hoped that this time, the answer was good enough for his father. He looked back to his father, now with hope in his eyes. There was no change in the man's expression. Is there someone that can threaten your close ones? No. The boy sighed after a while. Then, why do you need strength? The boy looked uncomfortable. I don't need strength. I want strength. The boy shook his head. Why would you not allow me to cultivate, father? Everyone else my age is already at least 2 major realms higher than me. Every time I walk around the city, I feel useless. I just want to become stronger. Is that wrong? The man's expression slightly changed to boredom. Instead of telling you, why don't I just show you? Go to the weapon store near the Broken Heaven Plaza. Stay in there for 30 minutes and come back. Then we can continue our conversation. With that, the door opened on its own. The boy Gravis looked at the door. He sighed and walked out. Why did his dad not just explain things? He always had to send him on these journeys to discover the answer for himself. Leaving the majestic palace with spires that pierced the sky, he walked to the Broken Heaven Plaza. The city reached over the horizon. There were so many people flying around in the sky that it reminded Gravis of an aggressive beehive. They were either shooting from A to B or just selling some wares in their flying stalls. Not everyone could afford to buy a shop in this city. Stalls, wares, mounts, slave beasts, buildings, and even palaces filled the sky. This scenery stretched as far as the eye could see. The buildings and palaces in the air alone were over 10 times the number of buildings on the ground. Though all these flying buildings did not officially belong to the city, they still created a congregation that stretched higher into the sky than the city was long. Even though the community in the sky, aptly named Sky Community, was only an unimportant part of the city, Gravis always wanted to fly up there with the others. The Broken Heaven Plaza was not very far from his father's palace. After just a couple of minutes, Gravis arrived. The buildings around the plaza looked very lavish, as if all the owners wanted to compete with their money. One building stood out, not for looking especially extravagant, but for looking like a cheap 2-floored stone house. The owner had enough money to build a more prominent building. Just the fact that they owned property in the core of the city proved as much. The building simply didn't need to impress people. Every single person in the city knew it. When his father said, "Go to the weapon store near Broken Heaven Plaza," he could only have meant this building. It was the most well-known weapon store in existence, the Divine Weapon House. Gravis walked into the Divine Weapon House and looked around. It was barren, as not everyone had the right to see the wares. The only thing worthy of interest was a simple-looking old man talking to 2 other people. Compared to the old man, the luxuriously clothed youngster and the well-armed guard behind him looked like they used money. Gravis walked to a corner of the store and waited. "Master Linus, please show me your bows," the youngster practically demanded from the old man in a rather direct manner. Acting like an arrogant young master in front of the best weapons craftsman in existence seemed inappropriate, but the old man didn't seem to mind. "Certainly, please come to the 2nd floor." The old man beckoned politely to the stairs. The young man and his guard walked up the stairs without waiting for the old man, who quickly followed. Was this what Gravis' father wanted him to see? He was not sure. "Well, father said I should only come back in 30 minutes, so I might as well wait." Gravis sighed and stood to the corner of the shop. After a while, the people from upstairs came back. Without even saying goodbye, the youngster walked to the exit, but immediately stopped when he spotted Gravis. "Prince, please forgive this little one for not noticing you." The youngster seemed panicked and quickly bowed deeply in front of Gravis. He seemed very nervous. The guard behind him even kneeled on one knee. Gravis was used to this scene as it happened all the time. Instead of feeling great or powerful by the subservient attitude, he only felt annoyed. Gravis waved his hand slightly. "It's okay, don't mind me. You may continue." "Thank you, Prince." The youngster rose and quickly walked out of the store with his guard. The old man saw the commotion and noticed Gravis. He immediately paled upon seeing him. He teleported in front of Gravis, nothing unusual in this city, and bowed. "Please forgive me, Prince. I did not see you entering the store. If I knew, I would have immediately welcomed you." Gravis sighed. "You don't have to apologize. I didn't announce myself or anything. It's okay." The old man seemed relieved and finally dared to look at Gravis. "Thank you, Prince. How can this humble self help you?" Gravis looked around the store. "Father told me to come and stay here for a while, though I am not sure why." The owner immediately paled as if he heard that his family died. His exalted grace? Why would that person take note of him? Did that person want to hint at something by sending his son here? Did he intend for his son to choose a weapon? That was unlikely. The boy couldn't even lift the lightest needle the old man forged. Gravis casually shook his hand. "Forget it. It's nothing to worry about." Gravis looked at the exit. "My father probably wanted me to see the exchange earlier." The old man was not sure how to answer, but he felt relieved, knowing that that person was not taking note of his shop. "Well, it doesn't matter. I'll leave. I wish you a good day, Master Linus." Gravis walked out of the store. "Thank you, Prince. I wish you a good day." The old man bowed once more. Gravis quickly returned to the royal palace and walked to his father's bedroom, the doors all opening by themselves. His father had not moved at all. Gravis walked to his front and sat down. "It's been about 30 minutes, father. Can we continue now?" The expression on his father did not seem to change. He simply narrated, "The young man in the shop was one of the more useless sons of the head of the heavenly divine sect. The old man was the best weaponsmith in the world. In your eyes, whose status is higher?" His father looked at him, waiting for his answer. Gravis didn't even hesitate to answer. "The heavenly divine sect is an upper-level sect in the world. If it were the head of the sect, their status would be equal, even though the head's power is stronger. But if it's only his son, their statuses are incomparable. There are many upper-level sects in the world, but only one best weaponsmith." As if expecting his son's answer, Gravis' father said, "Then why did he obediently do everything he was told, even though he could wipe out the young man with a wave of his hand?" Gravis hesitated. The answer was too obvious. Because of the head of the heavenly divine sect, he could similarly wipe out the weaponsmith with a wave of his hand. Suddenly Gravis' eyes widened. He understood why his father wanted him to see this exchange. His father chuckled lightly. "So why would you need strength if you have me as your father?" Gravis felt torn. He wanted to retort, but couldn't. His father was the most powerful human in existence, not just in this world, but in all worlds. The only thing rivaling him were the heavens themselves. Even if everything else were to die, he would still be there. But with that fact, Gravis' reasoning for becoming stronger was void. Who would dare threaten the close ones of the son of the opposer? No one. "Father, I asked you so many times already. I only want to become stronger. Is that too much to ask?" Gravis asked with frustration, not willing to give up. His father didn't seem to mind his son's disrespectful tone. "Because you do not know what it means to cultivate. If you step onto the path of cultivation, you would constantly be putting your life on the line unless you reach the peak." His father looked serious. "I would not protect you on your journey, because if I were to protect you, you would never reach the peak, and without reaching the peak, you could not live without regrets. True strength is only something that you can achieve with an immense amount of willpower, luck, and climbing over mountains of corpses. If I were to grant you strength myself, your longevity would increase, but without the tempered willpower of the cultivation world, you would not be able to handle the seemingly unchanging, unending life. You would feel empty. If there is nothing to strive for, then is there even a reason for living? As you are now, you will have a good life with high status and no problems. Destroying that for something that you do not even need is foolish." Gravis was looking at the floor, his fists tightly clenched. He was only 12. He did not understand everything his father told him. Many of the concepts his father told him seemed foreign. How could he imagine how he would feel 100 years down the line when he was just 12? Thus, he could not accept everything his father was telling him. Nevertheless, he sighed and stood up. "I understand. I'll go." After Gravis left, his father also sighed. "Gravis, if only you understood how it feels for me. Seeing thousands of my children dying in the cultivation world or to old age hurts. If you only want, but do not need strength, you are better off not cultivating. If you do not wholeheartedly wish for what true power grants you, then you cannot live without regrets in the cultivation world. Many painful experiences taught me that." He muttered and looked out of the window. "I have lived for far too long," he said after a long while. Cultivation was the tempering of the body, energy, and mind. A stronger body allowed one to have a sturdier vessel for more energy. Energy allowed one to cultivate the mental realm, and the mental realm allowed one to take control of their own life. With all three combined, one would be able to achieve strength. With strength, one can take control of one's destiny and freedom. If one does not wholeheartedly wish to grasp one's destiny or strive for freedom, they would only have regrets at the end of their lives. And a life without regrets is what everyone wants, but few can achieve. Gravis could not understand everything about cultivation. It surely did not help that there was an edict by his father that forbade people to talk about cultivation with his children if they had not started on this journey. The only thing Gravis knew was that cultivation gave stronger people power over weaker people, and he did not like the feeling of everyone having control over him. Though he was never in danger thanks to his father. Gravis had this conversation with his father many times before, but for some reason, his father had never agreed to let him cultivate. Whenever he had another failed conversation with his father, he always did the same afterward. Gravis walked along the hallway towards another bedroom. He wanted to talk to someone that understood him. As he arrived at his goal, the door opened by itself, a graceful and divine beauty standing in the room, tending to some plants. While everyone else would be struck dumb just by seeing her, he did not react at all. She was his mother. "Mom, why does father not let me cultivate?" Gravis said in a spoiled tone. His mother looked at him and chuckled lightly. "Gravis, how often did we have this conversation already? Trust your father. No one else has as much experience as him. If he does not want you to cultivate, then he surely has a good reason." Gravis groaned. "Is it so much to ask? Just giving me a cultivation technique would be enough. We have an uncountable amount of those." His mother looked dotingly at him and caressed his head. "That's not the issue. Although I am also quite strong, I basically have no idea about cultivation. But I have seen your many older brothers and sisters embark on this journey. Nearly all of them did not have a good life, and nearly all of them had regrets at the end of their life." Gravis looked disappointed but did not give up. "Then why doesn't he just grant me strength? It's not like father never did that before." Increasing other people's cultivation costs him nothing more than a wave of his hand. "Is that what you truly want?" his mother asked. Gravis was not sure. He wanted to say yes, that he was fine with bestowed strength, but somehow he couldn't. After a while, he sighed. "No, it's not." His mother smiled. "Oh, come on. Cheer up. Stella came earlier and was looking for you. Why don't you go visit her?" Gravis' head shot up. "Stella was here? When?" His mother laughed lightly. "About 30 minutes ago. She should still be around the main hall." "Thanks, Mom. I'll accompany her. Bye." Gravis ran out, not even waiting for his mother's answer. His mother just continued tending to some flowers. Gravis ran to the main hall, searching for Stella. Stella was one of his childhood friends. They practically grew up together and immediately clicked when they first met. He always felt happy when being near her. It didn't matter if they talked, walked around, or just sat in silence. He just liked being around her. He quickly spotted her looking at some paintings. She was a cute girl, also around 12 years old, her blonde hair wrapped in 2 pigtails. Her eyes were shining with curiosity, just like Gravis. "Stella here!" Gravis shouted as he walked to her. She turned around and immediately smiled when she saw him. "Gravis, I had to wait for half an hour for you. What took you so long?" Gravis rubbed the back of his neck. "Sorry, I talked with my father." Stella sighed. "The same thing again?" Gravis nodded. "Yes. Still no luck." Stella rubbed her chin, thinking, and her eyes lighted up. "I know. Let's get some ice cream and watch the sky community." Gravis just nodded. He didn't care what they did together. He just wanted to be near her. They held their hands and ran out the door to watch the sky community. Chapter 2, Heaven's Plot. It had been 2 years since that day out with Stella, yet today was completely different. Gravis stood in front of Stella's bed, holding her hand tightly. She was lying there, pale and weakly. Her family surrounded them, somber expressions on their faces. Stella smiled lightly. "Please, I don't want you all to feel sad for me. I knew this would happen eventually. I just felt it. I lived every day to my fullest and am content with my life." Gravis' heart already broke, but he still felt a sting when he heard her words. He didn't want to believe that his best friend was going to die soon. She was the same age as him. Furthermore, she had one of the highest cultivation realms possible. How could someone so young and strong possibly die due to an illness? It was impossible. "Don't worry. Just go to sleep, and tomorrow you'll feel much better." Gravis forced a smile. He didn't know if he tried to convince her or if he tried to convince himself. The pit in his stomach grew bigger when he said those words. "We can go eat ice cream again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. Don't worry." Her family was also heartbroken. Her father had a grim expression on his face, and her mother was already crying on her father's shoulder. Her older siblings looked everywhere, but into their sister's eyes. They looked lifeless and heartbroken. A thick layer of darkness shrouded the room. Stella also slowly got teary-eyed. Please, I don't want you all to feel unhappy because of me. Here, look. Stella weakly lifted her hands. A bright and hot ball was forming on her hand. Just like the star in my hand was born, she lowered the star, and it vanished. I too had a bright life. I am content with what I had. Just be happy for me. I don't want you all to grieve. That display pushed her siblings over the edge, and they also started crying. Her father tried his best to keep himself under control, but everyone could see his trembling shoulders and clenched fists. A deep and heavy silence overcame the room. Gravis' hands trembled. Don't say that. Everything will be fine. Don't worry. Stella smiled with tear-filled eyes. The only thing I regret is not being able to be together with you anymore, Gravis. I wanted to be with you, always. Her smile vanished, and the tears in her eyes fell down her face. I am so sorry, Gravis. I wanted you to be happy, but now you are crying because of me. I didn't want to hurt you. Gravis' heart broke again. He quickly rubbed his eyes. I am not crying. Everything will be fine. Don't worry about me. Just rest. Gravis now held her hand with both his hands. Stella smiled and nodded. Yes, I will. Thank you, Gravis, and sorry. She closed her eyes and her hands lost their strength. Gravis finally broke down completely and buried his head into his arms. Tears were pouring out, and his voice broke. Please don't leave. Please. He begged her, but she didn't react. It was inevitable, said a heavy voice coming from his side. Gravis didn't know when or how his father appeared. Stella's family didn't look with fear at the opposer, but with hope. If someone could save Stella, then it was him. Gravis quickly turned to his father, begging on his knees. Please, father. Please save her. I'll do anything. I won't ask to cultivate anymore. I'll never complain again. Please, I'm begging you. His father looked emotionlessly at his son. I can't save her. Gravis vigorously shook his head. You did it before. I heard you even resurrected dead people without a problem. Please save her. His father sighed. It's not that I don't want to save her. I really can't. The hope vanished from Stella's family's eyes, returning the atmosphere in the room back to grieving silence. Why? Gravis spoke with panic in his voice, a murky mixture of emotions sparkling from his eyes. Grief, sadness, anger, but mostly powerlessness. She is something called a shooting star, a person blessed by heaven. They cultivate extremely quickly, not by absorbing the energy surrounding them, but by absorbing the energy from heaven directly. But just like a shooting star, their light is blinding, but short. His father looked at Stella. Heaven does not directly interfere with an individual's fate. Yet, that doesn't include shooting stars. They were specifically created for a purpose, with a locked fate in mind. Destroying that fate means destroying the shooting star. Gravis was confused and hurt. But why? Why would heaven create such a cruel fate for her? The opposer continued to speak. I have noticed her since the day she was born. Heaven didn't try to conceal the fact that she was a shooting star. At that time, I didn't know what heaven was planning, so I didn't mind. Only when you two met and grew increasingly closer did I notice what heaven planned. Heaven created someone that resonated perfectly with you. It wanted to create friendship and love between the two of you. Gravis' father lifted his hand and clenched it into a fist and then take it away. Gravis looked shocked and couldn't believe what he was hearing. But why? I don't even cultivate. Why would heaven do this? His father somberly shook his head. Heaven does not care about you. This was not targeted at you. He looked out the window, his eyebrow showing his inner rage. It targeted me. There was silence in the room. After a while, the opposer continued. Heaven can't kill me. Heaven can't suppress me, and heaven hates me for that. There is nothing else heaven hates more than me. But since heaven can't do anything to me, it went after you. You are young. You are vulnerable. Heaven wants to hurt me by hurting you. The opposer fed. Worst of all, heaven did not break its own rules. It just created someone with a short lifespan. It's playing dirty. Suddenly, an unfathomably strong killing intent radiated from the opposer. The whole room fell into an icy coldness. It seemed like death itself had manifested in the room. The air vanished, and it felt like a volcano was about to erupt. But I don't care about heaven's rules, the opposer said severely, and with a loud boom, he burst through the ceiling. Heaven will. Hey. Chapter 3. Heaven's Problem. The opposer flew into the sky. He flew for thousands of kilometers until he finally stopped. He released his cultivation base, and the whole world shook. Everyone, no matter how weak or strong, sensed an oppressive aura radiating from his direction. The world stopped. Everyone was frozen solid and did not dare move. Animals, monsters, demons, devils, gods, humans, plants, the wind, the heavens, and the earth stilled. Heaven, an imposing voice resonated throughout the world. Everything heard and felt it. The ancestors of the high and peak sects were familiar with this situation. This was not the first time this happened. The ancestors felt fearful, for they knew a calamity was descending. An unimaginable amount of blood would dye the earth. Many lives will be lost. The only thing they could do was hope that it wasn't them this time. With their divine sense, they observed their disciples and the people close to them. They were checking their cultivation bases and hoping that they were not on the list this time. They hated the heavens and they hated the opposer. Whenever those two clashed, the weak ones suffered, and besides those two, everyone was weak. Heaven did not react to the opposer's voice. Heaven did not break its rules. Actually, by enraging the opposer, it achieved its goal. Would the opposer go overboard, even though heaven did not do anything wrong? No, the opposer also had to play by the rules or everything would become his enemy. Heaven, you can't suppress me, so you take your frustration out on my family. Today, I will make sure that this does not happen a second time. The opposer shouted. All the energy in the air was flowing towards him, but before it could reach him, it stopped. Heaven did not allow him to gather its energy. It still did not attack him. Instead, it showed him that it did not want to fight. It just stopped the energy. Today, you will pay. Suddenly, an oppressive divine sense covered the world, encompassing everything. The heavens thundered. The whole world trembled. Everyone knew that heaven was warning him not to go too far. Heaven was angry. It did not break any rules, so how dare he try anything? The opposer laughed in rage. Today, you will pay the most painful price. His divine sense solidified and locked everything in place. Heaven gathered all energy in the world above the opposer, threatening him. The opposer stood in the sky, looking down at the earth with a cold expression. Everything stilled. The ancestors' hearts nearly stopped, and fear took a hold of them. After a couple of seconds that felt like years, the opposer finally spoke. Star gods. Some of the ancestors sighed in relief. Some of the ancestors sighed in a mix of regret and helplessness. Some of the ancestors blanched completely. Some ancestors looked at a couple of their disciples in grief and helplessness. Disciples and other sects looked at their masters in terror. Heaven instantly exploded in power, but before heaven could do anything, it was already over. Every star god in the world closed their eyes and their souls scattered, never to be reborn again. It was like all the star gods fell peacefully into eternal sleep, yet everyone knew they would never wake up again. Grief, anger, and indignation shrouded the world. Millions died, and millions of families wept for their loved ones. Suddenly the earth shook. Pillars of unimaginable size broke through the surface from all around the world, all attacking the opposer. Seas froze and all the water transformed into spires that flew at the opposer. Lava broke through the earth and shot towards the opposer. All the air in the world pressed together with the opposer at the center. The mountains transformed into giant beasts that threw all their might at the opposer, and in the sky, heaven was still gathering energy. Surprisingly, even though the earth completely transformed, no one, not even the weakest ant, got injured. It was like they were in a separate space. The whole world attacked the opposer. The opposer took out a black saber and slashed. Every slash, the earth spires were split apart, the seas evaporated, the lava crumbled into dust, the air vanished, and the mountains were destroyed. The world was obliterated. After everything was over, the opposer looked toward heaven. All the energy in the world was gathered together at a single point. The opposer let out a bestial howl. All his energy shot into his weapon and, in a slash, shot towards heaven. The energy of heaven transformed into lightning and shot towards the opposer. The slash and the lightning bolt clashed. An enormous explosion, the likes of which was never seen before by any living being, destroyed the world. The light, being able to burn everything to nothingness. The sound, breaking apart the most durable materials. The shockwave, destroying space and time itself. Everything vanished. The only things that had not changed were the living beings. Everything passed them by as if this was all just an illusion. Even though no one was physically affected, trillions of beings still died due to the emotional impact. The explosion ended, and everything was silent. Never touch my family again. They heard the voice of the opposer, still sounding as imposing as ever. And go repair your world. Heaven showed no reaction. It did not want to waste more energy. Energy was not infinite, even for heaven. A small ball of earth appeared and quickly grew to the old size of the world. Steam condensed into the seas and rivers again. Air appeared from the void, and all the mountains retook their form. The world had not changed. Every town, road, forest, and plain was the same as it was before, everything except the energy in the air. It had lowered. But then, heaven shuddered, and the energy in the air increased again. It grew until it returned to normal, and the people could finally feel the earth and wind again. The calamity had passed. The opposer flew back to Stella's house and landed in her room. Stella's family and Gravis were still there. They had not recovered from the shock of what just happened. Gravis looked at his father and his father looked back. "Why do you need strength?" the opposer asked his son. Gravis looked at the lifeless Stella, thought back to her predetermined fate that heaven imposed, and thought back to what his father did. His father killed millions. The whole world probably hated him, yet the world did not dare to voice their hate. Heaven had attacked him, and he struck back. It did not matter what he did. Even though all the lives in the world were changed, for the opposer, nothing changed. Everything was the same as before. Gravis clenched his fists, a fire burning in his heart and eyes. Freedom, to not be oppressed, to not be under someone else's reign, to protect what I want and attack what I want. Gravis looked towards Stella, pain and anger in his eyes. And to never feel today's pain again. Gravis looked back into his father's eyes. "I need power," he shouted with rage and ambition. All pain was buried into his heart, fueling his fire, his hatred toward heaven exploding. His father looked at his son and nodded. "Then earn your strength and step into the cultivation world." Gravis' eyes shined and decided to do everything to not be under heaven's reign again. Heaven made a grave mistake that day. Chapter 4, Research Assistant. Everyone looked at Gravis as he opened the door and walked in. All the chatter that was just going on instantly stopped. The young people in the room never expected someone like him to come here. This place was not a location where nobles would frequent. This was a classroom. Specifically, a classroom for the preparation for a job that only low-born people normally took. Was the prince actually intending to become a research assistant? A research assistant was an occupation that allowed people with a poor background to make it big if they survived. Families with an, at least, average standing would not need to send their children to this death camp, where only a tiny portion of attendees survived. There was no reason for the prince to become a research assistant. A single fart of the opposer could make anyone become a god. Gravis felt a little embarrassed when everyone looked at him like that. Keeping his head low, he dodged the shocked youngsters and quickly found an empty chair and sat down. He kept his head low, not wanting to meet the eyes of the others. "Damn, everyone looks at you like you just killed a guy. What did you do?" Gravis heard a voice from his right. He looked at the youngster that just talks to him. He was an about 15-year-old boy with brown hair and brown eyes. Even though he looked clean, one could see his family's financial situation by the cheap clothing he wore. His hands were rugged and filled with calluses. "Hey, you deaf. I'm talking to you." The boy continued with an annoyed tone, seeing that Gravis had not reacted yet after a couple of seconds. Gravis quickly perked up. "Oh, sorry. I was just not used to people speaking to me like that." Gravis rubbed his neck in embarrassment. "You mean speaking like a normal guy? You're a weird one," the boy said while boringly looking at Gravis. "Well, if you want to keep secrets, go ahead." Gravis wasn't used to talking like this. "No, it's nothing like that. It's just, where I'm from, people always talk indirectly and very formal." So Gravis nervously twiddled his thumbs. "I'm not sure how to talk with normal people." Gravis dodged his eyes. "Man, what's up with you? Are you a stale soup without any backbone? A man needs to be like a good soup. He needs to have a backbone, lots of meat, and has to be refined to perfection. Speak up, will ya?" the boy shouted. The other people in the classroom looked at the guy with pale faces, while Gravis was just confused by his strange metaphor. "A man needs to be like soup?" he asked. The boy slammed his desk loudly. "Yeah, like a well-made soup. Strong, flavorful, hot, well-prepared. That's what makes a man." The boy looked at Gravis with intense eyes. Gravis was confused, but he also felt as if he kind of understood the guy. Gravis tried to sound more confident. "Yes, you're right." Gravis looked around the room at the staring eyes. "Let them stare. I shouldn't feel uncomfortable because of others." The boy laughed and heartily patted Gravis on the shoulder. "That's it. That's how a man should be." He then extended his hand to Gravis. "Hey, I'm Balor. I like to befriend all hot-blooded men. Hot-blooded men don't need to know each other to form a brotherhood. Our hearts are already connected." Gravis looked at the hand and then grinned. "Yes." He slammed his hand into Balor's and gave him a firm handshake. "My name's Gravis. Let's be brothers." Balor grinned uncomfortably. "Yeah, that's great. Hey, could you maybe let my hand go? I think it's about to break." "Oh." Gravis quickly let go of Balor's hand. Balor pulled it back and shook it vigorously. "Damn, what did you eat? Your grip is really strong." "Oh, I'm so okay, quiet down everyone." Just when Gravis wanted to apologize, a young man, maybe in his 20s, shouted into the classroom and walks to the podium at the front. The class immediately went to their desks and obediently sat down, still glancing at Gravis from time to time. Gravis looked quietly at the front, But after he saw Balor sitting with a straight back, muscles puffed out, he remembered the talk they just had. Gravis also sat up straight and crossed his arms. When everyone calmed down, the man spoke up. I'm Research Adept Fornius. This means I successfully completed my mission as a research assistant. I've been assigned to guide you for the next year so that you will be well prepared and, hopefully, survive. Fornius looked around the room. Now, let me just give you a summary of what a research assistant is. Fornius cleared his throat. Research assistants are people who will be sent to the lowest worlds, where the energy and its inhabitants are the weakest. The goal behind this seemingly mindless task is to research the cultivation techniques of these worlds. Even though the people might be weak, their techniques might not be. Every world is different, and every world has its own cultivation path. Some cultivation paths may lead to a dead end, but others may have huge potential. Without testing, we can't know. That is the reason why we only accept people who either have not cultivated at all, or have only tempered their organs and blood. If you already used a cultivation technique, then what's the meaning of sending you to a lower realm? Fornius looked around the room and spotted Gravis. He then looked at the ceiling and thought for a while. Then he continued, for those of you who have no idea about cultivation, let me just briefly summarize the first 4 cultivation realms and what they're all about. Gravis grew excited. Everyone was forbidden to talk about the specifics of cultivation around him. He never even heard the name of any realms. His father made sure of that. Finally, he got to know about cultivation. The first realm is called body tempering. Just like the name says, you need to temper your whole body, one piece at a time. It has 5 stages: organ tempering, blood tempering, bone tempering, skin tempering, and muscle tempering. It is important to note that you can theoretically temper your body in any order you want. Though, to get a good foundation, you first need to temper your organs and your blood. For example, if you temper your muscles first, what would happen? Fornius looked around the room. One of the only 2 girls in the class raised her hand, and Fornius nodded. You will explode when you use all your power because your skin and bones are not strong enough to support your muscles. The girl answered in confidence. Wrong. Fornius shouted. The girl flinched. Your body isn't stupid. It would never allow such a time bomb to exist in itself. What actually happens is that the body would only allow the tempering of the muscles to go as far as your skin, bones, and organs allow. That means that your muscles will be weak in relation to cultivators that tempered their muscles last. Now, I will tell you the best order to temper your bodies. First, Fornius stopped speaking when he saw a boy in the front. Balor, in fact, had raised his hand. What? Fornius glared at Balor. Fornius' death glare did not deter Balor. How do we know that your method is the best? My father said that you first need a strong skin to survive and strong muscles to win. If you can't survive, what's the meaning in going the correct way? Fornius' eyes showed a mixture of annoyance and boredom. First, if your body is not tempered perfectly, you will have immense issues starting at the 4th major realm. You need to achieve unity in the 4th realm, and if not every part of your body is equally perfect, you will find it very hard to achieve unity. Second, your case is only relevant if you do not have the resources or are in constant moral danger. We do have the resources, and there is no danger here yet. Third, because, His Exalted Grace, the opposer said so. Fornius glared at Balor. Under Fornius' intense glare, Balor finally crumbled and sat back down, not saying another thing. Fornius continued. So first, you need to temper your organs and your blood. Your organs must be first because they produce your blood, and all nourishment your body receives originates from them. Your blood must be second because it carries the nourishment. It would be a shame if your organs produced great nourishment, but your blood can't transport any of it properly. Also, your strength continually improves with time just by having tempered your organs and blood. That increases your upper limit for future tempering. Next, you need to temper your bones and your skin. It does not matter in which order. Bones have no relation to skin and vice versa. Lastly, you need to temper your muscles. Only when you tempered everything, does your body allow the perfect tempering of your muscles. You will be sent into the lower realms with tempered organs and tempered blood. The reason for that is that it's the most difficult to temper the organs and blood. It's tough to acquire the quantity or quality of nourishment in the lower realms for those 2 stages. Out of nowhere, some fingernail-sized pills appeared in the air and flew towards the youngsters. Eat these and your organs and blood should be tempered by tomorrow. Gravis looked down at his desk and was confused because he did not receive any pill. Gravis raised his hand. Fornius beckoned with his head. Excuse me, why did I not receive a pill? I have never cultivated. Fornius slyly grinned. You don't need a pill. You already have tempered your organs and blood. Gravis' eyes widened. What? Chapter 5. Energy Gathering. Yeah, you already have tempered organs and blood, Fornius said. But that's impossible. In my entire life, I have not even heard anything specific about cultivation. How could I have already tempered my body? Gravis shook his head. Fornius looked at him with boredom in his eyes. Remind me, who was your father again? Gravis understood. So it was his father after all. But when? He couldn't remember any time where his father could have tempered his organs and blood. Seeing how Gravis looked absent-mindedly at the ceiling, Fornius chuckled. You don't need to look so confused or think about a time when that happened. Your body slowly grows stronger with time with tempered organs and blood. Judging by how vigorous your blood is flowing through your veins, it probably happened around 15 years ago. You should also be around 15 years old, so it would be a miracle if you actually remembered. Gravis' eyes widened. But how? Fornius shrugged his shoulders. Don't know. Don't ask me. Ask your father. Tomorrow we will have a guest who will strengthen the dantians of everyone. You can skip that one too. Your dantian has been strengthened as well. You don't need to come tomorrow. Fornius then turned to the class and looked around the youngsters. All right, everyone has ingested their pills. Now let's continue. Fornius cleared his throat again. Let's continue with the next cultivation realm. After you have tempered your whole body, your body will be able to resist the pressure of natural energy. That means that you can start to absorb the energy in the air. Energy is in the air, soil, water, fire, lightning, stone, ore, wood, humans, beasts, basically everywhere. So the first step after tempering is feeling the energy and pulling it into your dantian to create a swirl. The swirl will then absorb the energy automatically. Then you have officially stepped into the second major realm, the energy gathering realm. Just like the name says, that realm is all about gathering as much energy as possible. As you accumulate more energy, it grows, and at some point, you will reach a situation where your energy can't grow anymore. That means, you are at the threshold of the next lower realm in the major energy gathering realm. When that happens, make a pause, get a drink, get some food, sleep a little, and simply relax for a couple of hours or days. When you are at your peak, release all your willpower and gather your energy like your life depends on it. You will need a strong enough push in order to increase the density of your energy. When you can't condense it anymore, you officially reached the next smaller realm. You do that 9 times, and you have reached the 10th level of energy gathering. Most lower worlds only do 8 condensations. You need a strengthened dantian to do 9. You will get your very own strengthened dantian tomorrow. Now, don't be confused when you hear terms like chi condensation, breath accumulation, magic whirling, or something similar to that in the lower worlds. It's all referring to the same thing. Since middle and upper worlds have no contact with lower worlds, there is no overarching terminology for natural energy in those worlds. We call it energy since it's the most straightforward definition. Also, our world is the highest, so we kinda got dibs on naming rights. Fornius chuckled. Other than that, you might be sent to a world where people create their energy swirl somewhere else, and not in the dantian. Experience has shown that the most stable and most accessible part for the energy swirl is in your dantian. By the way, for those of you not knowing where your dantian is, it's an empty space somewhere between your intestines. As soon as you guide the energy into your body, you will find a very fitting and empty place in your gut. That's your dantian. Fornius walks to the front of the podium. Now on to the next part of the agenda. Did you know that 90% of all people with fully tempered bodies never reach the energy gathering realm? Well, that's at least true for the lowest worlds. The reason is that it is hard to feel the energy in the air. That's especially true for people in the lower worlds. There isn't much energy in the air, so feeling that little amount is especially hard. So, let's get that out of the way first. Fornius opened his hand and held it out. Suddenly, a light blue stone appeared on top of it. This is energy ore. When a huge amount of energy gathers in one place, its increasing internal pressure transforms parts of it into energy liquid. Energy liquid slowly seeps into the earth, and some natural ores can absorb it, thus creating energy ore. If energy ore leaves its natural place under the earth, it slowly gives off the energy it has accumulated over the years. We are going to use that to get you to feel the energy in the air. Everyone looked at the shining blue ore, but before they had their fill, the stone vanished, and another stone appeared, this one black. This is a void stone. It's one of the very few ores that don't have any energy. None at all. Finding those in nature is extremely hard. Fornius smirked. Good thing we can just create them artificially. When void stones come into contact with natural energy, they absorb it like crazy. The class was focused on Fornius. Most of them have never come in contact with energy stones or void stones. This was something entirely new to them. In the next couple of minutes, I will switch between the energy stone and the void stone every 5 seconds. The energy in the room will then go up and down. In a couple of minutes, everyone should be able to feel the energy freely. One thing to note, Do not, under any circumstance, try to absorb the energy into your body, or you will explode. Fornius smiled while some people in the class gasped. Now let's start. With that, Fornius started alternating between the two stones. Some youngsters closed their eyes, while others looked transfixed at the rocks. Gravis closed his eyes and tried to feel. Some time passed. Gravis was not sure how long he concentrated. He felt nothing but a slight wind in the classroom. He tried to focus harder. His eyebrows furrowed, but he felt nothing but that annoying wind. This wind was honestly driving him crazy. When he tried to drown it out and get used to it, it suddenly changed direction and blew from the other side. Then it blew again from the other side. Gravis opened his eyes. They were already red from frustration. He looked at Fornius and the stones. Suddenly Gravis noticed that the wind was synchronized with the switch of the stones. Wait, was that energy? Gravis was not sure. It did not feel any different than if he were outside. He had to be sure, but how could he find out? Gravis suddenly got an idea. Fornius said that they should not gather the energy in their bodies. He never said anything about gathering it outside their bodies. Gravis opened his palm and looked at it with concentration, willing the energy to come here. After a while, he felt more wind coming to his hand. That made him concentrate even more, and the wind increased again. After a couple of seconds, the air in his hand was emitting a very faint light blue light. Fornius noticed this, smiled, and nodded. He walked towards Gravis and spoke in a voice only they could hear. Gathering energy outside the body is a possibility. It's not really useful since it takes a while to concentrate it into a sufficient density, but just doing this can train one's will. You can do that more in the future if you want. It will make it easier to concentrate and helps in the training of the third major realm. When Fornius first started speaking, Gravis lost concentration and the energy dispersed. Gravis just felt a strong wind coming from inside his palm, but strangely enough, the wind was not pushing his hand or fingers away. It felt bizarre. Gravis looked up, but Fornius had already walked back to his podium. After about 30 minutes, everyone had signaled to Fornius that they felt the energy. Fornius took back the stones. Alright, when you have tempered your bodies, just remember this feeling and try to imagine the energy entering your body and gathering in your danshin. That should not be a problem in the future. Now, for the last part of the cultivation lesson. The third major realm is the spirit-forming realm. This realm is all about training your mental energy. Your mental energy is your will, your understanding of the world, and your understanding of yourself. As you progress, you get smarter, your sensitivity grows, your willpower improves, and you get more creative. You probably heard the saying that in secluded cultivation, years pass in the blink of an eye. Fornius laughed and shook his head. That's not true. Actually, the opposite is true. Doing the same thing over and over without any outside stimulus is dull and boring. Only our improved willpower helps us through those years of boredom. As soon as you have condensed your energy 9 times and have grown your danshin to the point where it can't grow anymore, can you step into the spirit-forming realm? It's not hard to step into the spirit-forming realm or train in it. Just push your energy, meaning the energy in your danshin, into your brain. You will feel some pain, but after you emptied your danshin once, you will start to feel different. It's hard to describe actually. It's just different. Just keep doing that. At some point, you will feel like something is growing in your head. That means you have reached the first stage of spirit forming, the seed stage. At that point, you can observe your own body and soul. If you peer into your soul, you can see your own small space. That is your will space. There, you will find a seed growing. The more energy you put into your will space, the further the seed will grow. It will grow to be a sapling, then a tree, and finally, it will transform into a copy of yourself. Most lower worlds don't know about the last stage. They think the tree stage is the last one. Fornius walked around the podium and started walking to the exit. When you have achieved the self stage, you will automatically know what to do. The remainder is up to you. Fornius opened the door and waved his hand. That's all. See you tomorrow. And just like that, Fornius left the class first. The class was confused because usually, a teacher would leave the class last. Gravis was thinking about a lot of things. Finally, he knew how to cultivate. Finally, he knew what to do. The fog in his mind had cleared. Finally, he could smack. Someone had smacked the back of his head. Hey, you deaf. Let's go out. Balor shouted. Gravis looked up and saw that they were the only ones left in the class. Gravis rubbed the back of his head. Sorry, I was thinking about some things. Thinking? We got no time for thinking. We need to drink like right now. Balor laughed and started dragging Gravis out by the elbow. Wait, I've never touched any ow. Shut up. We will not stop drinking until you call me brother. But I shut up. Drinking. Now. Chapter 6, Fighting Experience. It had been 2 months since Gravis started going to the research assistant preparation course. In that time, he learned more about pitfalls in cultivation and what he had to look out for in the lower realms. Some basic fighting methods and general weapon usages were included as well. He also got a crash course in every essential side path in cultivation. Pill refinement. Alchemists mix and refine natural resources into pills, which increase aspects of a cultivator. Faster cultivation speed, one-time upgrades, auxiliary uses, and many more different pill effects were all covered. A general overview of how pill concocting worked was also part of the course. Equipment forging. Forgers mix and refine natural resources into armor, weapons, artifacts, and treasures. At some point, either the cultivator got too strong to use mortal armaments, or the necessary natural resources got too hard to refine into useful gear. Gravis also learned the absolute basics of that. Formation arrays. Rules, attributes, laws, and similar things were used as a basis to create a specific effect. It required one to be at the energy gathering stage in order to make any progress in formation arrays. Without energy, it was impossible to come into contact with these kinds of concepts. It was even harder to manipulate them for one's wishes. Cultivation inscription. At early levels, everyone could write down their cultivation and battle techniques, but starting at the spirit accumulation stage, the description of said methods only got harder. Words were not enough to describe all concepts at this stage. There were, of course, other side paths in cultivation, but those 4 were the essential ones. Every single one of them was vital to progress in one's path. Pill refinement was necessary to speed up or stabilize cultivation. Without useful equipment, one can't bring out their full battle power. Formation arrays were essential for fleeing or for fortifying one's base. Without cultivation inscriptions, one would not be able to learn new techniques from others, starting at the 3rd major realm. All in all, those 2 months varied between boring and exciting for Gravis, but in the end, he was happy that the theoretical part was over. The remaining 4 months were for gaining practical fighting experience. Gravis was excited. Finally, he could fight for the first time in his life. Gravis was standing in a black hall together with his about 30 other classmates. Not much light came into the building, the only source being the door behind them. The expressions in the faces of his classmates varied like the colors of a rainbow. Some looked scared. Some looked excited. Some looked nervous. Some looked happy. All right. Fornius loudly clapped his hands. With his clap, a little over 30 portals opened in front of the youngsters. Everyone will take 1 portal each. Inside those portals, you will fight a varied mixture of things. Monsters, humans, plants, cultivators, and even the environment itself will be your enemy. Since it's your first time, you will only face 1 enemy at a time. Your only goal is to kill your enemy. If the environment is your enemy, you will need to survive with as much stamina to spare as possible, or your next enemy will have a huge advantage. You need to kill and survive for as long as new enemies appear. There is no time limit. Most of the youngsters sighed in relief. When Fornius saw that, he grinned maliciously. That is a bad thing. It means that, if you can't defeat your enemy, you will die. This is a genuine life and death battle. If you can't win, you will die. Before the youngsters could react to his words, Fornius' energy rumbled, and every youngster got pushed towards 1 portal each. For your info, on average, about 20% of people die in their first test. Fornius grinned more. Good luck. With a clap from Fornius, everyone shot into a portal, no matter if they wanted to or not. A comfortable chair appeared, and Fornius sat down, having no care in the world. 1 second, Gravis saw the hall, and in the next, he only saw a humongous glowing red cave, at least 100 meters in diameter. The stones and walls in the cave looked like they were at their melting point, but he did not feel any heat from them for some reason. Fortunately, the light of the walls illuminated the entire cave in red light. On the right side of the cave, he could see a rack of different weapons. He could see spears, swords, sabers, poles, axes, poleaxes, hammers, daggers, and many more. Every weapon was made of black stone. Through his basic course of equipment forging, he could tell that all weapons were made entirely out of void stone. Void stone was very sturdy for the lower realms, but using it as a weapon was senseless since it absorbed all the energy it came into contact with, including the users. Fortunately, Gravis could not use the energy yet, so he could ignore that aspect. Gravis immediately ran over to grab a weapon. The words of Fornius were still ringing in his head. He could actually die here. He thought this was just a practical test a couple of minutes ago. His excitement from being able to fight vanished and was replaced with nervousness and fear. He quickly skipped the other weapons and took the saber. While Gravis learned about the different weapons in the theory lessons, he felt that the saber suited him the best. A sword was an all-rounder and was the most popular weapon, but it lacked the purity of killing power the saber had. While a sword could cut both ways, the necessity of an edge on both sides took away from the weapon's weight. For Gravis, swinging a saber felt way more satisfying than swinging a sword. Suddenly, a bright purple light appeared about 20 meters in front of him. The light quickly vanished, and Gravis saw a tortoise. The weapon rack also disappeared. Apparently, he could not change weapons mid-fight. He made his choice and could not change it anymore. The tortoise was only around a meter high, but its head looked imposing. Dark red scales covered the head, and some of the scales poked out like natural blades. As the tortoise slowly moved toward Gravis with a neutral look in its eyes, its muscles bulged with every step. Gravis' breath quickened, and he tightened his grip on his saber. This is it! His first fight! He screamed and ran at the tortoise. He looked into its eyes as he ran closer. The closer he got, the more his fear increased. The tortoise looked forward. To Gravis, it seemed like the tortoise would not falter even if the heavens broke down. Gravis suppressed his fear and continued his charge. I can do this. I can kill it. I must kill it. I'm nearly there. I will survive. Gravis shouted in his head, but the closer he got, the more oppressed he felt. His expression changed from fiery battle intent to horror. I will die. And Gravis stopped his charge. Suddenly Gravis felt an enormous wind pressure and his hair flew back. Just centimeters in front of his face was the head of the tortoise, which just snapped its jaws at him. The powerful impact of the jaws ringed in his ears and reverberated in the cave. It sounded like a gigantic steel plate fell onto the floor with its flat side. That bite would have absolutely crushed his head. If he hadn't stopped, he would be dead by now. Gravis' hair stood on end, and he immediately jumped back with all his might. Where he stood before, another bite of the tortoise thundered, again ringing in his ears. Cold sweat continuously flowed down his back, and his heart thumped loudly in his ears. He nearly died. It was so incredibly close. Why was I charging in like a madman? We learned to never charge into a fight blindly. Gravis further retreated, and the tortoise slowly made its way over to him. This continued for about a minute. Gravis slowly calmed down. The tortoise was slow. As long as he retreated, he would not be in danger. He could work with that. He needed a plan since he could not run forever. He had to find a way to kill the tortoise. Chapter 7. Fighting the Tortoise. After a while, Gravis decided to check how good the tortoise was at turning. He ran circles around the tortoise while steadily moving closer. The tortoise was very sluggish. It moved slowly and it turned even slower. It was no problem for him to circle the tortoise even from a 5-meter distance. Gravis realized that the only dangerous thing about this tortoise was its deadly bite, and he grew more confident. Gravis remained behind the tortoise while it was watching him. When he moved away from the tortoise's vision, it turned its head the other way to keep watch on him. Finally, Gravis had a plan. He went to the back left, and when the tortoise turned its head, he quickly ran to the right and swung his saber on its hind leg. Sparks and blood flew out, and Gravis managed to create a gash a couple of centimeters deep, hitting its bone. The tortoise shouted in pain and quickly pulled all its legs into its shell. The shell fell heavily to the floor. Just by the sound of the thump, one could hear the density and weight of the shell. If Gravis could not even cut through the bone of its leg, he could only dream about cutting through its shell. The head was still out and continued to watch Gravis. Its expression changed to rage. Now what? Gravis thought. He could no longer attack its legs. Should he attack its head? Gravis looked at the tortoise's head and decided against that. Just one snap would end his life. On top of that, the scales on its head looked way tougher than the ones on its legs. Gravis jumped to the other side again, so the tortoise lost its vision of him. He kneeled and stabbed into the leg hole on the other side. He felt the saber connect, but also felt that he didn't get a deep cut. He could not use all his strength in this position, and sabers were not made for stabbing. Nevertheless, the tortoise roared again, and 2 legs on the opposite side of Gravis shot out. Its legs kicked the ground, and its shell rotated by 45 degrees. At the same time, its head snapped towards Gravis, who jumped back. It nearly got him. Its jaws echoed throughout the cave again. Gravis took a deep breath. That was dangerous. So the tortoise could pull a maneuver like that. The tortoise, angry that it missed, roared more and continued to snap at Gravis, even though he was well out of its range. Apparently, the tortoise was furious now. It turned to him and sprinted in his direction, faster than normal. Though a sprint from a tortoise was still slow in a human's eyes, Gravis still had no problem running circles around the tortoise. On top of that, the tortoise's mad dash aggravated the injury on its leg. More blood was seeping out, and Gravis continued to take his time. He just had to walk a little faster to outspeed the tortoise. His stamina consumption was negligible. The tortoise, on the other hand, was bleeding and running like crazy. Gravis just had to wait. A couple of minutes later, the tortoise slowed down, and heavy breaths came from its maw. A trail of blood coated the floor of the cave. Gravis jumped behind the tortoise and attacked the already injured leg again. The tortoise immediately pulled its leg back into its shell. It had stopped underestimating him. It would not make the same mistake twice. Gravis tried to hit its leg a couple more times, but he never connected. This fight was really frustrating for him. That thing was turtling up. Gravis furiously rubbed his head, trying to think of something, while the tortoise continued to leer at him with a look that could kill. Gravis had no more options. He had to go for the head. Here goes nothing. Gravis took a deep breath, ran to the back of the tortoise, and jumped on its shell. The tortoise furiously moved left, right, up, and down. Its jaws were constantly snapping around him, and a couple of times, it nearly got his fingers. He continued to modify his hold on the shell until the head could not reach him anywhere. Noticing that it could not get Gravis off like that, it changed to swinging left and right, forward and backward. Gravis was holding on for dear life. After a while, he noticed that the tortoise was better at alternating between back to front than from side to side. It seemed to almost lose its footing a couple of times. Gravis' eyes shined. This was the way. That tortoise was going down. When the tortoise forcefully whipped to the left, Gravis jumped off, gripped the heightened part of the shell, and began to pull. With just his physical strength alone, he would never be able to lift the tortoise, but when its center of gravity was already out of balance, he had enough power to flip it. He caught the tortoise by surprise, and before it could stabilize itself with its other legs, he flipped it over. The top of the shell crashed on the floor with a mighty thunk. The tortoise went crazy and tried everything to flip itself over again. Fortunately, it seemed like it would not succeed anytime soon. Gravis jumped on top of its belly. Neither its legs nor its head could reach him there. He lifted his saber and slashed down. Blood gushed out, and the saber went in, while the tortoise let out another roar of pain. Gravis slashed, again and again, getting deeper with every swing. After about 20 swings, Gravis was out of breath and the tortoise's underside was mutilated. It was slowly losing its strength. Even if it managed to turn around again, its own weight would probably push out its organs through its underside. Gravis won. He sat down at a safe distance and continued to look at the tortoise. After about 5 minutes, its breathing began to grow weaker and its movements slowed. Even though the tortoise tried to kill him, looking at a slowly dying beast was still uncomfortable for Gravis. He was not used to death. Looking at the tortoise, Gravis felt like he was losing something, or that he did something wrong. He knew that only one of them could survive. There was no alternative. Yet, Gravis still felt a lump in his throat. The tortoise finally drew its last breath. When it completely stilled, Gravis sighed and stood up. His next enemy would appear soon, probably. He continued to wait, but nothing happened. After 10 minutes, the purple light appeared again, but this time, it went through the whole cave like a wave. Gravis looked around, not sure what was happening. Suddenly, water poured out of the cracks in the cave furiously. One would think that the cave was beneath a lake and was about to collapse, but the stones didn't move. The about 50 meters high cave quickly filled with water. It filled up all the way to the 40-meter mark until it stopped. Gravis was swimming at the surface. Gravis narrowed his eyes. This was probably one of those instances where the environment was the enemy. The wind picked up, and big waves kept appearing all over the water. In the beginning, Gravis could still swim, but as the waves grew stronger, things started to get problematic. It proved difficult to stay above the surface with increasing frequency. He had to do something, or else he would drown. When he had the chance, he took a deep breath and went underwater, where there were no waves. He calmed down and looked up at the surface. The surface was going wild with waves, but under the surface, everything was calm. Maybe this was the way to survive this ordeal with as little stamina usage as possible. He could probably also survive at the surface, but he would also use up all his energy. Gravis tested how long he could hold his breath, and quickly figured out that 5 minutes shouldn't be an issue. He had strengthened organs, after all. After realizing that, Gravis calmed himself and closed his eyes. He tried to be as relaxed as possible, only occasionally using his arms to keep himself underwater. While he calmed down and floated inside the calm water, he felt a feeling of serenity. His fight with the tortoise still plagued his mind, but it wasn't as prominent as before. His body relaxed, and he thought about his battle with the tortoise. He had to be more careful in future fights. Not every enemy would be this slow and cumbersome. Maybe next time, he would not have the time to strategize and plan. He thought back to his father, Heaven, and Stella. He missed her dearly, and it still hurt. But when he thought of Heaven, his inner rage grew. Gravis was not even considered a chess piece in Heaven's eyes. He was nothing to it. As long as Heaven survived, he would always be under its mercy. Heaven's fight might have weakened it, but the same could also be said for his father. His father and Heaven were on the same level. If it really wanted to, it could pull a similar scheme again. Gravis continued to think about his life and cultivation. He looked around the underwater cave. Everything below the surface was still. Nothing moved, and Gravis felt like all of this was just a dream. He started to forget that he was underwater, and it felt more like he was flying in the air. He closed in on the floor, not feeling any pressure at all. He looked at the dead tortoise and felt alienated, like it had nothing to do with him. This was life in the cultivation world. A life and death situation will come. What you want doesn't matter? Gravis sighed. Strangely, no bubbles appeared from his mouth. By now, Gravis completely forgot he was underwater and took a breath. Water filled his lungs, but he didn't notice. Even stranger, the water seemed to alleviate his need for air. Gravis didn't notice any of that. He also didn't notice that he didn't need to push himself downward anymore with his arms. It was like he was not underwater at all. He walked to the tortoise and lifted it. Underwater, everything was lighter. He carried it to the wall of the cave and placed it down. He walked back to the center and sat down, his eyes closed. The corpse was behind him, and now it was time to look forward. He sat there and waited in silence. Chapter 8. The Cruelty of Life. After about 2 hours, the water receded. Gravis opened his eyes and stood up. He felt different. He had already realized that he could breathe in the water some time ago. He didn't know how that was possible, but decided that when all of this was over, he would ask Fornius. Right now, there were other, more important things. When the water completely vanished, the purple light returned in the middle of the room. After it disappeared, Gravis saw a mountain lion. Its height was around the same as the tortoise's. Thick beige fur covered its entire body, and 2 red eyes watched him. Without pause, the mountain lion charged at Gravis with surprising speed. It was about as fast as Gravis himself. Gravis readied his saber and stood his ground. He felt fear again, but this time, he managed to control it. The tortoise and the water helped him shed a layer of his weaker self. Even though he was still afraid, it did not impact his judgment. The mountain lion jumped and clawed at his torso. Gravis jumped to the other side and kept watch on the mountain lion. After it missed, it turned to him and pounced. Gravis sidestepped again. He was not attacking until he either could no longer easily evade or knew all its tricks. That he survived the initial snap of the tortoise was only luck, and he never wanted to bet his life on luck again. The mountain lion continued attacking in different manners, but all its movements were predictable and straightforward. Running away from something was always easier than to kill something. Even though both of them had about the same speed, with Gravis always sidestepping and keeping track of the mountain lion, he never got hit once. After about a minute of doing this, Gravis felt confident that the mountain lion had no more surprises for him. Now, he wanted to test something else. The mountain lion swiped at him again, but this time, Gravis didn't sidestep. Instead, he slashed at the incoming claw. The edge of the saber hit the middle of the mountain lion's paw and cleanly severed it. The defenses of the tortoise and the mountain lion were incomparable. The mountain lion jumped back and roared in pain. It tried to stabilize its position with its injured front paw but immediately pulled it back because of the pain. It stopped its barrage of attacks and just watched Gravis cautiously. It knew it was outclassed here, so it retreated and ran away. Gravis just watched it as it tried to find an exit of the cave. Unfortunately, there was no exit. Gravis sighed. He felt a lump in his throat. It felt as if he was about to do something wrong. He felt the same when he watched the tortoise slowly die. The mountain lion was no danger anymore, so there was no real reason to kill it. The only reason would be that he was forced by circumstance. If he didn't kill the lion, he wouldn't be able to leave. He decided against killing the mountain lion for now. Time passed, and both of them sat on different sides of the cave. Gravis no longer felt serene. Instead, he felt extremely frustrated. Again, he was forced to do something he didn't want just because he was too weak. Before, he was forced to watch his best friend die, and now he was forced to kill something he didn't want to kill. If he were stronger, would he even need to go through all of this? After a couple of hours, Gravis gritted his teeth in frustration until a trickle of blood ran down his chin. He hated this. He stood up and looked at the mountain lion with fiery eyes. There was no other way. He had to kill it. Gravis channeled his frustration into rage and ran at the mountain lion, which quickly stood up and ran away. In their top forms, their speed would be equal. Sadly, or fortunately, the mountain lion had half of its paw missing. Gravis quickly reached the lion and chopped with his saber. A huge gash opened in one of its thighs. It turned around and tried to bite him, but Gravis sidestepped again. I should, at least, make it as quick as possible. With that, Gravis slashed the middle of the mountain lion's head and split it in two. It immediately died, but its corpse still twitched for a while. Gravis continued watching the twitching body until it finally stopped. He gritted his teeth more. I hate this, but wallowing in self-pity and frustration will not help me. First I need strength, and only then will I gain freedom. He pulled the corpse to the side of the cave and placed it beside the tortoise. After that, he returned to the middle and waited. No matter what I have to do for now, I have to bear with it. The only thing I can do is grow as strong as possible, as quickly as possible. But when the purple light returned and vanished, Gravis' frustration grew severalfold. A couple of things appeared this time. Some wood, some weeds, some stones, and a cup of water all sat on the floor. He wondered how he should deal with the problem of starvation and dehydration. Seemed like every couple of turns he would get his water and food. Those bastards. Gravis was seething with rage. The last thing that was sent over was a small white bunny, just looking around curiously. I get why killing your own food is necessary, but why did the timing have to be so shitty? He ignored the bunny for now and started a fire with the supplies. Instead of grilling the rabbit, he roasted part of the tortoise. Cat meat was tough and stringy. Tortoise definitely tasted better. After a good meal, he continued watching the bunny hopping around. It was probably searching for food. Sadly, there was no vegetation in the cave. It would starve sooner or later. Gravis sighed. Might as well get this over with. He stood up and picked up the bunny. He quickly grabbed its head and pulled, decapitating it. He wanted it to die as quickly as possible and didn't know how to easily and painlessly break its neck. This is the best alternative, he thought. He was not hungry anymore and placed the corpse beside the others. Slowly, the lights of the cave began to dim until they only emitted a feeble light. This was probably his intended time to sleep. This training would go on for a while and sleep was mandatory. After waiting for 30 minutes, he was confident that no more monsters would spawn in the near future. He went to one side of the cave and lay down. Falling asleep was hard, but after an hour, his fatigue took over and he lost consciousness, clutching his saber between his arms. Chapter 9. This feeling again. Gravis' next opponent was a dark humanoid shadow with a short sword. It was slower and weaker than him, yet, it was challenging for Gravis to defeat it since it was incredibly cunning and kept on surprising him. This was the first fight where Gravis could not sit back and plan out his strategy. Every time he thought he saw an opening, the shadow countered immediately as if it had planned everything. Gravis received multiple cuts across his body. If he hadn't had tempered organs and blood, he would have already bled out. Luckily, tempered organs and blood substantially increase the body's recovery, especially when nothing else was tempered. A stronger body needs more energy and nutrients to heal. In this case, his lower cultivation level was an advantage. Though, if he had tempered skin, the shadow wouldn't even be able to scratch him. After a while, Gravis finally realized that planning and strategizing would only make him lose. In the end, Gravis decided to grip the shadow's sword with his hand and slashed him with his saber. The shadow's sword cut Gravis' hand to the bone. Luckily, the plan worked and the shadow died. This was another essential skill for survival, trading injuries to kill your opponent. Gravis' hand would need at least a day to become usable again. So, he went into the next fights with just one hand. The next opponent was a cheetah. Its speed surpassed Gravis, but everything else was weaker. With the experience of killing the mountain lion, the cheetah was quickly defeated. That he could only use a single hand didn't change the outcome. The next opponent proved problematic. It was a rhinoceros. It had heavy armor, and in a straight line, it outsped Gravis. Luckily, with the experience of fighting the tortoise, he quickly noticed that the rhinoceros also had issues with turning. The fight took a long time, as Gravis could only use a single hand to swing his saber, and the rhinoceros's armor was thick. After some hours, Gravis got the idea to stick his saber up the rhinoceros's bum. It felt weird, but this was definitely the best way since the rhinoceros slowed considerably and bled profusely. After some time, it finally died. There was nothing that stood out with the next two enemies, and Gravis quickly overpowered them. After those, he received his food and water again. This time, the food was a living fawn. Gravis finished the deed as humanely as possible and ate some rhinoceros meat. Gravis noticed a pattern with the enemies. All enemies only had one or two strong points that outclassed him, but at least one major weak point to exploit. This practical test was probably there for getting the research assistants used to fighting different kinds of opponents and to quickly spot weaknesses. Like this, a couple more cycles of fighting and resting passed. Gravis got the hang of things, and with his added experience and healed hand, he overpowered everything. He did not know how much time had passed, but it had to have been at least a couple of weeks. With every passing cycle, 2 additional fights were added before the next rest period. Gravis slashed his saber and cleanly cleaved the giant toad in two. He picked it up and threw it onto his corpse mountain, which had grown to an impressive size. Toad tastes like shit, he nonchalantly commented. He had become used to killing by now, as Gravis accepted his situation. Only more strength could help him. He calmly waited for his next opponent. The purple light appeared again, but this time, it flowed over the cave, like a wave. Gravis narrowed his eyes. This is probably another environmental challenge, he thought. True to his word, the air began to whirl and quickly took up speed. After some time, Gravis had problems keeping his eyes open. The wind soon grew into a storm and finally into a tornado. If he didn't do something, things would get ugly, so he stabbed his saber into the ground. Clank! The saber bounced off without even leaving a scratch, and Gravis frowned. Shit! The tornado grew more powerful, and Gravis could not hold himself on the ground anymore. He began to whirl through the air furiously. He could still breathe, but it was growing more difficult. Thump! Pain shot through his whole body, as the storm smashed him into a wall. Fortunately, he only broke his shoulder. Unfortunately, the storm hadn't ended yet. As he continued flying through the air, he tried to keep watch on any walls coming his way. Thump! While he looked at the closest walls and ceiling, he neglected to look at his surroundings. One of the corpses of his corpse mountain slammed into him. Luckily, this time nothing broke, and he only received a couple of bruises. With all the pain and the stress, he forgot about the corpses. He looked around and noticed all the bodies whirling through the air. This made things even harder, and it surely didn't help that he was quickly approaching another wall. He relaxed his body and tried to minimize the impact by rolling. The roll was awkward and still injured him, but it was only a minor injury. As he neared another wall, Gravis raised his arms and parried a flying corpse, using its momentum to his advantage. This time, the impact on the wall was even easier to handle. Gravis continued to parry the corpses, and also managed to get better at mitigating wall hits. After some minutes, he calmed down as he finally got the hang of it. He also didn't receive any more injuries. Additionally, he also started predicting when corpses or walls hit him. It seemed like he could feel the rhythm of the storm. In his eyes, the storm grew increasingly more predictable. Soon, he didn't even need to look at the corpses to know when they were coming. He just felt it. It was like the storm was telling him. Gravis furrowed his brows. This felt very similar to the time when he was underwater. Just like last time, he slowly lost the sensation of the wind surrounding him. He was still flying through the air, but it didn't pose any danger to him anymore. Gravis felt more and more as if he were standing still, and everything else simply circled around him. Corpses stopped hitting him, and he didn't smash into any more walls from then on. His body also stopped spinning, and he had no more problem staying upright inside the storm. He began to slow down, and at some point, he managed to stand stationary in the air, the storm and the corpses furiously whirling around him. It's this strange feeling again. It's like I am part of the storm. Gravis looked around and watched the chaos unfold around him. Inside, he was calm and started to move around the air like he was flying. After some minutes of flying around, Gravis noticed that there was no eye in the storm. The tornado whirled even in its middle, probably so that no one could bypass this challenge. Gravis slowly descended, and his feet hit the ground. He looked up and saw that most of the corpses were already torn into multiple pieces by now. A mist of blood filled the cave, whirling around and scraping the walls. This was probably the reason why the stones in the cave were red. Gravis plucked some pieces of fur from the storm like they were apples, and wiped down all the blood on his body. According to the pattern of the cycles, there would be one last fight after the storm. Additionally, he also had a broken shoulder, though he wasn't really worried about that. Every enemy seemed to be on the same level in this cave, just with different strengths and weaknesses. Gravis had no problems with defeating them anymore. After about an hour, the storm calmed down. Blood and pieces of corpses rained onto the cave and Gravis. The biggest piece was only 10 centimeters long. Thunk. Well, except that one. Gravis looked at the bloody tortoiseshell. This thing was still in one piece, surprisingly. It seemed to be even harder than he initially thought. When all the rain settled, the purple light appeared again. When Gravis saw what appeared this time, he narrowed his eyes. This might be a problem. Gravis was looking at a man in his 30s. The man held a longsword in his hands as he scanned the cave. When he spotted Gravis, the man also narrowed his eyes. This fight should have been easy for the man. He would only need to kill a newbie without tempered skin, bones, or muscles. Before he came here, he wasn't worried. But when he looked around the blood-drenched cave and noticed all the corpse pieces, that thought quickly changed. What happened here? When he spotted Gravis, all the hair on his neck stood up. He saw a youngster, thoroughly drenched in blood. His long hair stuck to his face, and through it, the man could see two intense eyes staring into his own. Right now, the man was sure that this fight would not be as easy as he thought. Was this kid a monster? Gravis waited for the man to do something, but nothing happened after 5 seconds, so Gravis took a step towards the man. As per the rules of the contract, enforced by this array formation, I am required to inform you of some things, the man loudly shouted. He sounded imposing, but that was only a front. When Gravis took that step, the man panicked and tried to win some time to regain his bearings. Seeing that Gravis had stopped, the man released a hidden sigh of relief and continued, "I am your last challenge." Gravis narrowed his eyes further, but inside, he grew excited. Finally, this hell would end. Chapter 10, The Last Fight. The man continued, "My name is Samuel Norrington. I have been judged guilty on 4 counts of burglary, 25 counts of robbery, 184 counts of, and 184 counts of murder." Suddenly Samuel charged forward. He had said the bare minimum that the formation required and tried to get Gravis by surprise. He quickly closed the 5 meters and lifted his sword for a chop. Gravis didn't see this attack coming, but he immediately jumped back due to his fighting experience. When Gravis saw the sword slashing down, he took his chance and countered with a side swing. What Gravis didn't realize was that his opponent's chop was only a feint. The sword easily stopped in the middle and quickly stabbed forward. The sword would reach Gravis before his saber reached Samuel. Gravis jumped back again, aborting his attack. Samuel got the initiative and slashed again. Gravis only managed a weak block and got blown back again. Samuel didn't let up and continued to follow up with even fiercer attacks. Gravis could only continue holding on bitterly by blocking and jumping back. Sadly, mistakes were bound to occur when one only bitterly blocks, and Gravis received a slash to his abdomen, where a large cut opened. Luckily, Gravis was able to jump back further and finally got some breathing room. All this dodging grated the bones in his broken shoulder, and the pain he felt was immense. The open cut in his abdomen was even worse. It was continually leaking blood, and small parts of his innards could be seen from outside. Seeing that Gravis was outside his attacking range, Samuel stopped his onslaught. The surprise attack had worked and gave him a clear advantage in the fight. "You know, when I first saw you, I thought this would be a bitter fight." Samuel smiled arrogantly. "Luckily, I wasn't completely deceived by your bloody appearance. Say, did you roll in blood to intimidate me?" Gravis furrowed his brows and said nothing. He tried to think of a way to win against his opponent. He only had to get one clean hit and it would be over. Not in the mood for talking, Gravis jumped forward and took the initiative to attack with a slash from the side. Samuel lifted his free arm to block this strike and stabbed Gravis again. Gravis gritted his teeth. He had tempered organs and blood. A stab through the abdomen was not lethal for him, and he was ready to exchange this injury for a severed arm of his opponent. Gravis' saber cut his opponent's arm, but surprisingly, it didn't sever the arm. His saber only cut to the bone. "Idiot!" Samuel grinned and stabbed through Gravis' abdomen. Gravis' body seized up, and with sheer willpower, he kicked his opponent away. The sword left his gut, and Samuel flew back for a couple of meters. Samuel casually landed, laughed loudly. Trying to trade injuries with someone who has tempered their skin. Truly, only an idiot would think of that. "Did you honestly think that you, with your weak power, could sever my arm?" Gravis didn't say anything. So that was the reason. His opponent had already tempered his skin. No wonder he felt such a massive resistance when his saber met Samuel's skin. This was a problem. How could he kill someone like that? Gravis could die here. Even when he fought the tortoise, he didn't receive any injury. Things were not looking good. Samuel just calmly stood there. "You want to know something? Do you realize why my counts of and murder are the same even though they are in the hundreds?" Gravis didn't answer, but Samuel didn't mind. Gravis felt a faint sense of unease. Nothing good could come from that. That's because killing someone is the domination of the body. Samuel tapped his chest with the side of his sword. When you kill someone, you have won over their body and stepped over their physical dignity, but that is only the body. Samuel lifted his free hand and tapped the side of his head, smiling. "What about the soul?" Samuel waited for an answer, but none came. He released a short chuckle. "When you want to dominate someone completely, you should do it thoroughly." He lifted his sword and pointed it between Gravis' legs. "By fucking them, you dominate their soul too. I pride myself on the fact that I have completely dominated everyone I killed. I want to keep that streak up, so I hope you don't mind." Samuel licked his lips. By now, all hair on Gravis' neck stood up. He felt a mix of disgust, fear, and disbelief, but Samuel didn't let up. His whole demeanor changed. He violently clenched his fist in front of him and shouted with a mix of passion and fury, hate, despair, fear, humiliation, pain, suffering. Who cares about the feelings of the weak? If I were weak, I could only blame myself. Gravis was more than disgusted by this vile fiend, by now. What domination! Gravis had only killed to protect himself up until now. He never even had the thought to prolong the suffering of his opponents. Killing was a tool to resolve conflict securely, not to dominate. Gravis got used to the idea that he might die in his venture for power, but he could not accept dying to someone like Samuel. This guy is seriously messed up. Samuel wanted to unnerve Gravis, but surprisingly accomplished the opposite. The last of Gravis' hesitation vanished. Killing a human and a beast was different. With his hesitation gone, Gravis finally found a plan that could work. I don't want to do this, but I can't see anything else succeeding. He shook his head and looked at Samuel with determination. Samuel calmed down again and his smile resurfaced. Oh? You want to go? What makes you think that this will end differently? He raised his sword and pointed it at Gravis. Well, what are you waiting for? Come on. The sword tip drew a circle in the air, taunting Gravis. Gravis gritted his teeth again. He charged and slashed at Samuel. Samuel blocked with another part of his injured arm and stabbed his sword forward. This time, Gravis jumped back instead of clashing with his opponent. Samuel gained the initiative again and followed up with a slash towards Gravis' injured shoulder. This is it! Gravis shouted in his mind. He curled up his left arm. His shoulder was broken, but his elbow wasn't. At the same time, he used all his strength to slash his opponent's neck. Samuel didn't see that coming. He was sure that Gravis would jump back. What was it with this suicidal exchange? He had tempered skin, but he didn't have the guts to let someone just hack at his throat. Samuel jumped back. Gravis was sure that Samuel would go through with his attack and was prepared to sacrifice his arm for a chance at victory. Sadly, it didn't go as planned. Instead, Gravis opted to imitate Samuel and pressed his advantage. Attack after attack hammered onto Samuel's sword or got deflected by his arm. Samuel felt difficulty moving his arm as more injuries accumulated. Gravis continued attacking like he was possessed. Faster, 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 faster. He screamed internally. His muscles and lungs were burning, but he continued. Samuel stabbed with his sword again, but Gravis didn't seem to notice or care. Gravis' attack continued. This guy's insane, Samuel shouted internally in panic. Does he not care for his life? Will he not rest until both of us are dead? Samuel didn't have the guts to exchange his life and jumped to the side again. The makeshift jump wasn't enough to completely protect him. Gravis' saber cut off a massive chunk of flesh from Samuel's arm. Samuel screamed, but Gravis continued without rest. While Samuel was still recovering from the pain, a saber cut into his torso like an axe cutting a tree. Samuel fell to the side and his sword flew away. Gravis didn't stop. Samuel continued to scream and block with his arms while lying on the floor, while Gravis chopped like a madman. He chopped and chopped and chopped and chopped and didn't stop until Samuel was definitely dead. Gravis breathed heavily and looked at the different sized pieces of Samuel in front of him. Some muscles in his body tore, but his organs were already repairing them. He felt like shit, but not everything was bad. He was prepared to sacrifice his arm, but the weak will of his opponent made that unnecessary. Ironically, by not risking his life, he lost his life. Gravis calmed down, but before he could process the fact that he killed his first human, he got swallowed by purple light and vanished. Chapter 11. Review. Fornius sat on his chair. One youngster after another appeared in the hall. Even though their speeds in clearing the test varied greatly, people who took multiple days longer actually appeared just minutes later than the faster ones. The reason for that was that the practical test was performed in a lower world. The lower the world, the easier it was for the laws of the world to operate. When 1 day passes in the highest world, 10 days pass in a higher rank world, 100 days pass in a medium rank world, and 1,000 days pass in a low rank world. By that calculation, a week in a low rank world would only equate to about 10 minutes in their world. For Fornius, not even 30 minutes had passed between the times of when the youngsters left and came back. The youngsters all came back in different conditions. While some looked healthy, others were nearly dead. Fornius just had to activate the formation, and all the injured people returned to peak condition in no time. Oh, another one's coming, Fornius commented casually as purple light flashed. The purple light revealed a youngster wholly drenched in blood. Fornius couldn't even see the color of the boy's outfit through all the blood. His left shoulder was broken and a massive cut went through his abdomen. The youngster looked at Fornius and the others beside him. His fighting spirit was still shining through his eyes. But when he looked at the other youngsters, their own fighting spirit didn't lose to his. That youngster was, of course, Gravis. He continued watching the others, but the atmosphere was broken by a loud slurp coming from Fornius' smoothie. Man, you look like you had a ton of fun. Fornius snapped his fingers and the formation activated. All the blood on Gravis vanished and his injuries healed nearly instantaneously. Gravis took a deep breath and felt refreshed. It felt like taking a shower after a hard workout, just many times better. Fornius waved. Come over and stand with the others. Gravis released a long sigh to calm down. He had fought for his life for over 2 weeks, so it was hard readjusting to normal life. He walked over and stood beside the others, who watched him with interest. Gravis didn't speak and just waited. A couple more youngsters appeared and returned to their classmates. All right, everyone's here. Fornius stood up and stretched. Gravis looked around and counted 25 people, including himself. Suddenly he noticed something. Fornius, where is Balor? Gravis asked. Dead, Fornius said while stretching to the side. Gravis paled. What? Dead? He died, just like that? Yeah, he hadn't thought of staying underwater in the water rapid stage and was completely powered out by the end of it. His next opponent was the rampaging rhino, which completely decimated his left arm. His next opponent, the cunning shadow, gave him the rest. Fornius commented casually. Gravis gulped and stayed silent. He went out with Balor nearly every day for the last 2 months. They had grown pretty close and Gravis considered him a true friend, but just like that, he died. Gravis couldn't even say goodbye. He also couldn't remember the last words he said to him. Fornius clapped loudly in his hands. All right, people die. It happens. Get over it. Fornius looked at the others, while Gravis gritted his teeth. Okay, there are 25 remaining, and 7 died. That's a death rate of a little over 20%. That's average. Although Fornius looked at Gravis. I'm surprised you survived. Gravis was confused. What did he mean? Fornius continued. Everyone goes through the same opponents but shuffled around. So even though you all fought the same beasts and environmental challenges, the order differed. Fornius pointed at Gravis. You, especially, had shitty luck with the order. Your first opponent was the newbie crusher. The others were not sure which opponent Fornius meant when he said newbie crusher. They thought back to the beasts they fought but weren't sure. Gravis, on the other hand, thought of the tortoise. Do you mean the tortoise? A light of recognition shone in the others' eyes. As they continued to think about it, they nodded. The tortoise was no problem for them because of the experience they gained from killing other monsters before. Fighting that slow, but explosive tortoise first would be very dangerous. They looked at Gravis with pity. What shitty luck. Fornius nodded. Yeah. About 70% of people die when they fight the tortoise first. They charge in without a plan and get decimated by its snap. If you have the experience, its difficulty is about average. The reason why it's so deadly in the beginning is that one mistake would prove fatal, while other beasts are more forgiving. Making mistakes on other beasts may give you some scratches, but making a mistake on the tortoise is deadly. Gravis sighed. What shitty luck. Though he understood what Fornius meant, Gravis didn't receive an injury from the tortoise, but he had nearly died. If he had continued charging back then, he wouldn't be here right now. Okay, let's start reviewing. You all survived the test and killed your opponents. So congratulations to that. Fornius said as most of the youngsters smiled in relief. But, Fornius shouted, and the others stopped smiling. That was a challenge with only one opponent coming at you at a time. The challenges will increase in difficulty the next time. Even though the average death rate of the first test is the highest, at about 20%, the second test still has a death rate of about 10%. So don't slack off. Most of the youngsters grimaced. Life wouldn't become easier. The next test will take place 1 month from now. At that time, you will always have to fight 2 opponents at the same time. Fornius grinned. You can imagine how fun that'll be. Fighting 1 opponent was completely different than fighting 2. They knew that, so they didn't look forward to the next test. They laughed at their past selves that were excited about getting to fight. None of them wanted to repeat this experience. You can go back home. The next 3 days will be rest days. After that, we resume our theoretical lessons. And with that, Fornius walked out of the hall not caring about anyone else. When he was halfway out the door, Fornius seemed to remember something and turned around. Gravis, come with me, he commanded. Gravis was confused, but walked to Fornius, who continued walking down the hallways. Gravis didn't know what Fornius wanted but followed him anyway. They took a right and walked up several flights of stairs until they were at the building's highest floor. They continued walking until they arrived at the door at the end of the central hallway. A strikingly beautiful young woman was sitting at a desk beside the door. He's here. Can I go now? Fornius asked with an annoyed tone. The woman smiled. Thank you. That's all, she said sweetly. Fornius fed and left, leaving Gravis behind. The woman stood up and knocked at the door. Sir, he's here. Send him in, an imposing voice came through the door. The woman opened one of the doors slightly and beckoned Gravis to enter. He hesitated but walked in. The person wanting to see him was probably someone important, judging by the position of his office. What would someone like that want from him? He entered, and the door closed behind him. Gravis was inside a 10-meter-long and wide office, filled with ornaments and art. In the middle of the office sat a muscular, tall man with black hair and black eyes. He wore a suit and appeared very clean. Though, one thing surprised Gravis. The man wore an identical ring to his own. The man lifted his head from his desk and looked at Gravis with a smile. Hey, little brother. Chapter 12, Family. Little brother? Gravis asked, quite confused. He never met his siblings. He wasn't even sure if he had siblings. The man just grinned. Yeah, you're my little brother and I am one of your older brothers. He stood up, walked around the desk, and patted Gravis on the shoulder. You can call me Brother Orpheus. Seeing that Gravis still looked unsure, Orpheus laughed. Man, this brings me back. I had the same look you have when I met my first sibling. Gravis looked dejectedly at the floor. I'm sorry. I didn't realize I had siblings. Father and mother never talked about their other children. Gravis realized what he said and quickly tried to correct himself. He didn't want to give his newly met brother the feeling that his parents didn't care about him. No. They probably did, but I didn't notice. Gravis rubbed the back of his head. Sorry. Seeing this, Orpheus laughed loudly. Haha, don't worry. Orpheus patted Gravis' shoulder again, showing that he didn't mind. Maybe you didn't notice, but our siblings are forbidden to talk to the center child until their way has been established. Now, Gravis was confused again. What do you mean with center child? The center child is the newest born child from father and mother. Orpheus pointed at Gravis. So, right now, that is you. Gravis furrowed his brows. Okay, but why? Also, what did you mean with established way? Orpheus sat back down on his chair and beckoned Gravis to sit too. Gravis did just that. This practice comes from Father. He cares very much about us and wants us to find our own way in the world, without outside influence. Only a heart and will born out of itself is the strongest. If, for example, I persuaded you to start cultivating, you might not truly have the heart for it. This would be an obsession implanted by others and not born by yourself. There's a difference in that. Orpheus continued. And with finding their way I mean, when someone internally decides which path to take in life. Some choose a quiet life. Some want to cultivate and some want parts of both. When father sees what his child has decided to do with their life, he brings them on the right course. Orpheus took a sip from his coffee. In your case, it's becoming the strongest. Gravis now looked skeptical. How are you so sure that is what I want? Orpheus smiled. Because you're here. Orpheus noted that Gravis wasn't fine with that explanation, so he just laughed again and continued. Father has chosen the hardest path for you. Even if it doesn't seem like it, he cares for all of us. If he weren't sure that you wholeheartedly wanted to become strong, he would have never allowed you to start cultivation from the bottom. Gravis looked absent-mindedly at the window. I am also confused by that. Couldn't he just grant me strength, or give me techniques or resources? Why send me on this life and death path? Orpheus sighed. Father can only give strength up to the immortal emperor realm. You don't need to think about how high that realm is. You only need to know that it is strong, but not very strong in this world. There are multiple major realms above that, and if you didn't forge your path with blood, calamity, and setbacks, you wouldn't have the experience or will to get much further in life. A stable palace must be built one brick at a time. If you complete it but want to expand it to multiple times its size, the foundation won't hold. Gravis was very interested in what an immortal emperor was. An immortal emperor sounded very strong, probably stronger than he could imagine. Yet, not even that was the end. He also remembered that his father shouted the word star god before he fought heaven. A god should be stronger than an immortal. There was a long way to go. Orpheus smiled slyly and continued. What do you think? How many siblings do we have? Give me a number. Gravis wasn't sure, but he knew that his parents had been alive for a long time. Don't know, maybe 50? 50? Orpheus laughed loudly again. There are thousands. Gravis' jaw hit the floor. Thousands? I have thousands of brothers and sisters? Orpheus snickered. Yeah, and imagine that. All those siblings have their own family. Gravis couldn't wrap his head around the fact that he had thousands of brothers and sisters. Where are they all? He asked. Orpheus took out a canteen and another cup. He filled it with coffee and the cup moved to Gravis by itself. He beckoned Gravis to drink and Gravis took a gulp. He had tasted coffee before, but this cup tasted like crap. He tried to hide his disgust, but Orpheus noticed and laughed again. Do you know how many people would lick my boots just to get a sip of that? Yet, you look like you just faceplanted into a pile of shit. Gravis went a bit red with shame. He didn't want to disrespect his brother. He opened his mouth to apologize, but Orpheus waved his hand. Don't worry. As if my coffee can keep up with our father's. I just wanted to tease you. Gravis sighed, but inside he felt warmth. This was family. He felt that his brother was honest with him and had only goodwill. Though, he was still unused to the fact that he had a brother or thousands of them. He lifted his cup again and emptied it. Orpheus slammed his desk. Good. That's how a man should be. Even if you don't like it, do what you deem necessary without a complaint. You truly are my younger brother. He drank from his own cup and also emptied it. Now back to your question. You want to know where our other siblings are? Gravis nodded. Everywhere, Orpheus said. You can find a lot of them in this city. You can find at least one sibling in every sect. You can find some of them roaming around. Many of them are in important positions around the world. Instead of widening, Gravis' eyes narrowed. Then why have I never met them? By your words, I established my way some months ago. That is plenty of time for them to visit or, at least, say hello. Orpheus sighed. Don't be angry at them. I can understand them. Look at where you are right now. You just went through 2 weeks of life and death battles, and in a couple of months, you will go to the lower worlds. You can only return when you ascend by yourself, and how many people actually manage to ascend from lower worlds? The answer is pitifully few. The chance that you return alive is less than 1%. Gravis felt a lump in his throat. He only thought about his preparation and his future journey. He didn't think about how hard it was going to be to ascend. Gravis sighed and kind of understood why his siblings didn't want to see him. Orpheus continued and confirmed Gravis' thoughts. Imagine meeting your new brother, only for him to vanish or die a couple of months later. If they meet you, they will get attached to you, and if you die, they will grieve. Even though we live far longer than mortals, the death of a close one never gets easier. Orpheus sighed again. Please don't think bad of them. Gravis could understand his siblings. Maybe he would do the same in their shoes, though it still felt wrong. It all boiled down to the fact that he was still too weak. So weak that his siblings feared to form any attachments to him. Well, there was at least one. I hope you don't mind me asking, but why did you decide to meet me? Orpheus smiled. Actually, because I chose the same path as you. Chapter 13, Luck. You took the same path as me? Gravis asked. Orpheus nodded. Yes. Just like you, I decided to become free from constraints and decide my own destiny. I also joined as a research assistant. I went through the lower, middle, and high worlds and continued cultivating here. Orpheus sighed as he thought of his past. But I found the love of my life in this world and finally created my own family. I went out less and just wanted to be with my family more. Over the years, my drive for strength weakened and now I am content with living happily with my family. Gravis thought a lot about what he just heard. This could be him in the future. Maybe he would also find a family and settle down at some point. Was it really necessary to struggle through so many dangers just to get stronger? Just enough strength that not everyone could kill you also seemed enough. But when Gravis thought about what heaven did to him, his expression changed and he gritted his teeth. While living under heaven, he could never be completely safe. He also didn't want to depend on the security his father provided for the rest of his life. Orpheus watched as Gravis' expression changed multiple times and waited. He wanted to know what Gravis' genuine desire was. After a while, Gravis looked up at Orpheus. Why did you stop cultivating? He asked. Because, in order to increase my strength further, I have to struggle for resources with my life on the line. Even if I manage to get all the resources I need and never get injured, I would never reach Father's level. For me, it is absolutely impossible to reach his level. So there is not much difference between my current realm and the highest realm, outside of Father's. I also don't want to think about leaving my family behind. If I die, Orpheus narrated calmly. There was no flicker of emotion. His heart had settled and fully supported his decision. Gravis lifted an eyebrow. Why do you say that you can never reach Father's level? Orpheus frowned for the first time since the conversation started. Gravis, those are things I can't talk about. Orpheus looked at Gravis somberly. If I told you, heaven would not allow you to continue cultivating. You must know heaven is antagonistic to our family. Did you think that your run-in with the newbie crusher was a coincidence? Gravis felt a little intimidated by the shift of tone. What do you mean? Phornius said the enemies are random. It's basically just bad luck. Orpheus nodded heavily. Exactly. It's bad luck. Luck is in control of heaven and no one can influence their own luck. That is why it is called luck. Every living being has a certain amount of karmic luck that heaven bestows upon them. Karmic luck can also change. Some people stumble upon extremely profound inheritances that suit them perfectly. That is a person favored by karmic luck. Orpheus narrowed his eyes. When someone has great karmic luck, they may get rescued when they fight an opponent they can't defeat. They may find an incredibly strong battle or cultivation technique in some rundown shop. They may also arrive in a clearing with an unimaginable treasure, while opponents fight each other to the death, and the person just has to take the reward. Opportunities bestowed by heaven are called luck. Orpheus sighed. Yet, we are children of the opposer. Do you think heaven would bestow us with any luck? No, no one in our family has any karmic luck, and since we are the only living beings under heaven with no karmic luck, we have the worst luck. The fact that the order of your challenges in the practical test was the worst is only natural. Gravis shook his head. But having no luck would only equate to having average luck. Having no luck does not mean that the worst case would always happen. Orpheus laughed blandly. That's wrong. The average is not having no luck, but having average luck. Even people with average luck still have some luck. That's why it's average. An average outcome requires an average amount of luck. You might think that the best luck is a 10, average luck is a 0, and worse luck is a 10, but that's wrong. Bad luck does not exist. Bad luck is the absence of luck. So, in actuality, best luck is a 10, average luck is a 5, and worst luck is a 0. Gravis blanched. But what about the tortoise? I survived its first hit by luck. Orpheus just shook his head. It might have looked like luck, but your weak will saved you. Your weakness saved you, not your luck. You may call it luck, but it was bound to happen. There was no luck involved. On the other hand, you randomly got to fight the newbie crusher first and immediately got an environmental challenge after that. The first opponent is the hardest to defeat. After every opponent, there are about 10 minutes of rest, yet that does not hold true for environmental challenges. Orpheus held up a finger. Imagine this. You fought the most dangerous opponent first and immediately got thrown into an environmental challenge where you have no time to rest. After that, you fight a mountain lion, an enemy that is fast enough to match you and strong enough to actually kill you. If it weren't for our family's innately high synchronicity with the elements, you would have died. Gravis' eyes widened. You know what happened to me in the water and wind challenge? He asked. Orpheus nodded. Yes. Everyone in our family has a very high talent regarding communication with the elements. Our father is, of course, no exception. High synchronicity with the elements will be extremely important later down in your cultivation journey. But that's still far off. Not even I have reached that realm. Let me explain it in a little more detail. Synchronicity with elements means absorbing the positive aspects while controlling the destructive aspects of an element. Water has oxygen, yet normal humans can't filter it. With us, the water filters itself. We can control the flow of water and live in it as if it were air. In storms, we can communicate with the storm and use it to our advantage. Gravis looked astonished. Didn't that mean that no one could hurt him while using elemental attacks? Orpheus saw Gravis' expression and laughed blandly. Don't get overexcited. This only counts when the element is not being controlled. Taking control of something that is not being controlled is different from trying to control something under someone else's control. If there is a free seat, you can just sit down, but if that seat is occupied, you first need to beat the occupant before you can sit down. You won't have any issue taking control of an enemy's elemental attack if they are weaker than you, but what's the point of that? If they are weaker, they are weaker. You don't need the elements to win in that case. Gravis' mood deflated slightly. Of course, it wouldn't be so easy, but it should be useful in some situations, Gravis thought. Orpheus took another swig of his coffee. So to summarize, always expect to run into the worst case scenario. Never depend on your luck, because that will immediately fail. Orpheus put his cup away and smiled again. Anyway, what did you think about the beasts in the challenge? Orpheus asked, back in his jovial mood. Both brothers had an enjoyable conversation for a couple of hours until night came, and Gravis went home. Chapter 14. Furious Thirst for Power 1. In the next couple of months, Gravis learned a lot more about practical fighting techniques and group strategies. The ice between him and his classmates also melted and he began to socialize more. This was important for his development because he really lacked in the social aspect. He never had anyone to talk with on the same level. Either people were way above him in strength, or his status intimidated them. Gravis also found out why everyone in the city knew that he was the son of the opposer. It couldn't be possible that everyone knew his face, could it? And he was right. The reason why everyone knew that he was the new child of the opposer was actually his ring. The ring released a special aura that any people with sufficient strength could feel. He never noticed because, well, he didn't have sufficient strength. The ring released different auras based on the status that the wearer had in regards to the opposer. When he hadn't found his path yet, his ring said to everyone, "Don't touch him." That's also why absolutely everyone was so scared when they saw him, even though they treated his siblings normally. Gravis asked his brother Orpheus what his ring said now. Gravis laughed bitterly when he remembered what Orpheus said. It says, no protection. But what it actually means was free food. His father was no longer protecting him. If anyone killed him, they wouldn't need to be worried about any repercussions. He also asked his brother if the ring could do anything else. Nah, was the answer he received. Another interesting fact that Gravis learned was that he was the only one fighting humans with tempered skin. The others fought mortal warriors. Orpheus said that Gravis had been in the tempered organ and blood stage for over 15 years. If the monsters or humans were the same as the others, he wouldn't receive the intended tempering. Orpheus assured him that, aside from his bad luck, the test was for him just as hard as the others' tests. After 2 months, the second practical test started. Gravis was immediately greeted by the perfect combination of another tortoise and the cunning shadow. The shadow always kept close to the tortoise and defended its weak points. The fight took an entire day. Gravis finally made progress when he traded an internal injury for the death of the shadow. With his added experience, the tortoise was no issue. In the next round, Gravis understood that he had absolutely no luck. The Storm Environment Challenge and the Rapids Environment Challenge came at the same time, creating a massive whirlpool. Every other person would have died since it was impossible to survive this. Ironically, by creating the deadliest stage, he got to relax for some hours due to his elemental synchronicity. Maybe Heaven's absence of luck didn't consider his elemental synchronicity? Though, if everything only appeared once, it could also mean that he wouldn't have the environment as help in future fights. If a massive storm would have raged while he fought Samuel, would that even be considered a battle? Gravis could simply control the wind and watch Samuel get smashed to a pulp. Even though he could not create his own storm, he could control natural storms to a certain degree. The next couple of rounds were no big deal. Gravis cleared them quickly, and after a couple of days, he was at the final challenge again. This time, he fought 2 people with tempered skin. In contrast to expectation, the fight finished exceptionally quickly. Gravis learned from his battle with Samuel that he needed to exploit the surprise of the enemy. While they were talking, he immediately charged forward. The first guy jumped back, and the second guy hacked at Gravis from behind. Gravis turned around and used a full-powered slash to cut halfway through the enemy's neck, while the enemy's axe cut off Gravis' left arm. With a kick to the stuck blade, he finished the job. The other guy was stunned and intimidated. Gravis took up his saber and charged at him with bloodshot eyes. The enemy was so afraid that he couldn't bring out all of his power. Like Samuel's ending, this guy was also hacked to death after a miserable while of barely dodging and blocking. Another 3 people didn't return this time. Gravis sighed as he realized that another 3 friends died. He was pretty close to those 3. Did his heavenly luck include his close ones as well? Would heaven not allow anyone to be close to him or help him? Orpheus said that something similar happened to him. Only people that didn't cultivate seems to be spared from this luck. Orpheus assumed that heaven would rescind the karmic luck of anyone that got close to him. Gravis felt frustrated beyond belief. Heaven created Stella in order to hurt him to get back at his father. Then, it stole all his karmic luck. On top of that, it also rescinded all karmic luck of people close to him. Gravis felt a mix of guilt, frustration, and anger. 5 people died because they were too close to him. Maybe that was also a reason why no one wanted to get close to him. Gravis decided that he would only get close to people who were mortal, or stopped their cultivation journey. If they didn't involve themselves in life and death struggles, their bad luck wouldn't kill them. Gravis was depressed for a couple of days after that. The realization that he had to walk his whole path alone without anyone by his side, but his family, gnawed at him. From his family, he only had his father, mother, and 1 brother by his side. The others didn't seem to care about him. Gravis couldn't wait to go to the lower realm. The more he remained in his current realm, the more he realized how weak and oppressed he was under heaven. Heaven's oppression only fueled his ambition to get stronger. So Gravis went on a mad quest for power. Chapter 15. Furious Thirst for Power 2. In his quest for strength, he even asked his father if he could train anywhere near the city. Gravis had realized by now that pressure and life and death fights made him grow more powerful, even if his cultivation realm didn't increase. Also, he wanted to release some rage and frustration. His father shot the idea down immediately. Apparently, even the weakest beast in the city's vicinity was more powerful than the strongest person in a lower world. You can go ask your brother Orpheus. He should be able to help you with that, his father commented. I am actually very happy that you seek strength this much. The more your desire for power rises, the firmer your will gets. You may not realize this, but only a small minority of people look for life and death tempering willingly. Others may look at you like you're insane, but if you survive and continue down this path, you will always be the strongest in your cultivation realm. The opposer ruffled his son's hair for the first time in his son's life. Gravis was shocked since his father never showed physical affection before. He also saw his father smile genuinely for the first time. His father said encouragingly, I am looking forward to your return from the lower world. You have the will and talent to succeed. So what if you don't have any luck? The opposer harumphed. If someone stumbles upon some big inheritance, you just need to kill them and steal it. You may not be able to gather your own luck, but you can obtain luck from others. Look at it like rearing pigs. The opposer grinned slyly. Gravis smiled happily. He may not agree with his father's cold attitude towards life, but he was happy that his father was proud of him. They talked some more, and Gravis returned to his brother Orpheus. Orpheus told him that he could theoretically let him fight in the practical test as much as he wanted, but he shouldn't forget about his age. The perfect time to start one's cultivation journey was the age of 16. Gravis was about 15.5 now, and he still had 2 months of theory ahead of him. Orpheus told him that the third practical test would be different than the other ones and that it wouldn't take up much time. The third test was different in a sense that there were no cycles. All the enemies would appear after a set time, no matter if the previous enemy died or not. If one weren't fast enough in ending the fights and keeping their stamina, they would get overwhelmed. On the same day, Gravis did his third practical test. The time for new enemies to arrive was 1 minute. Gravis had no issue in clearing that since everything died before the minute was up. He only spent a couple of hours fighting, but was incomparably exhausted. In the next 2 months, he repeated the practical test a couple more times, raising the difficulty every time. After a couple of times, his brother informed him that their standard beasts were running low, and they had to save some for the actual third practical test. Gravis frowned, but Orpheus smiled instead. Orpheus went out and captured a lot more beasts, and nearly all of them were new. Though, the difference between the standard beasts and those new ones was that the standard beasts were tailored to have some strong points and some weak points. Those newer beasts were just any random wild beasts. They could be fragile beasts with no strength or strong beasts with nearly no weaknesses. Gravis accepted this condition and fought again. Most of the beasts were average. They didn't have any major weaknesses or major strengths. Everything was about the same level as Gravis. The fights were harder this time, since exploiting a weakness was harder. Gravis took longer to complete this challenge, but also received valuable new experience. He was getting better at spotting the slight imperfections in his enemies, which couldn't even be called weaknesses. On top of that, when he noticed that multiple enemies used the same tactic against him, he realized that he, himself, also had weaknesses. He used his enemies as a mirror and tried to reduce his imperfections. He had some success in that, but one was never perfect. In the last 2 months of his theory classes, he spent a total of an additional 4 months in the practical tests fighting. The time dilation was 1 to 1000, so it always only took him some minutes to complete the battle. His classmates slowly noticed that Gravis' aura changed. He seemed colder somehow. They were not sure why he felt colder, but he just did. When he looked at them, they also felt slight nervousness. The reason for all that was that Gravis was always in battle mode even when he didn't battle. He was unconsciously releasing his will, which subconsciously influenced others. Of course, people in a higher realm wouldn't care, but his classmates were in the same realm as him. Through Gravis' crazy slaughterfest, he slowly built a aura, which generally only appeared later in the cultivation journey. Just like Gravis, Orpheus also had a crazy light in his eyes. He wanted to throw more enemies at his younger brother and see how quickly his battle intent would grow. Sadly, they had no more time. If they continued going like this, Gravis would miss his golden opportunity to start his cultivation journey. In the last couple of days, Gravis just waited by himself. He had accepted that no one could come close to him. He always looked at others coldly so they wouldn't want to get to know him. He didn't want to kill more friends just by being friends. He felt lonely inside, but he suppressed this feeling with rage and cold ambition. The only 2 options were death or reaching the peak of power. There was no in between. Finally, the day came when the last practical test was held. The youngsters waited in the hall for the portals, with Gravis at the head. The others didn't want to come close to that cold psycho. He seemed warm, awkward, and innocent when they first met, but now he only acted like a madman. They kept each contact with him to a minimum, lest they said anything wrong. If one looked closer, one would notice something peculiar. The youngsters didn't want to talk with him due to fear of him. Also, when Gravis did anything they didn't like, they wouldn't voice their opinion. If one looked closely, they would notice that the youngsters looked at Gravis the same way as the world looked at the opposer. Chapter 16. Will. Phornius didn't arrive too early or too late. He looked at the youngsters and announced loudly, "It's time for the last test. The enemies will appear after a fixed interval of 45 seconds. It doesn't matter if the previous enemy died or not. After 45 seconds, you have to fight the next one. If you haven't defeated your opponent by then, you will have to fight 2 enemies simultaneously. Environmental changes will be kept up for 3 minutes and do not count as enemies. Be prepared to fight your enemies in unfavorable environments." Phornius narrowed his eyes. Also, there will be no breaks until the test is over. The youngsters narrowed their eyes. This would be hard. In comparison to the others, Gravis didn't react. He went through harder tests by now. He didn't even know why he was required to attend. This test held no meaning for him. As the portals appeared, the youngsters' eyes narrowed and they walked forward. "Gravis, stay here," Phornius suddenly said. The others were too preoccupied with the preparation for their test to care about Gravis right now. When all youngsters vanished, Gravis looked at Fornius and waited. He kept looking in Fornius' eyes with his, by now, usual cold look. Fornius grinned slightly. "That's a good look you have there." Fornius' eyes also narrowed, and suddenly, Gravis felt cold. Gravis felt like a blade rested on his throat. "But don't get cocky," Fornius coldly remarked and went back to his usual bored self. Gravis released a sigh. This woke him up. For the first time, he felt utterly outclassed. Just Fornius' aura alone reminded him that, while he was the strongest in his class, he was still weak in the world. For the first time in a long while, Gravis restrained his aura. With a deep breath, he calmed himself down. "Do you think it's a good idea to curb someone's will aura right before a battle, Fornius?" An imposing voice appeared from the entrance of the hall, and Orpheus entered. He looked at Fornius with a sharp look. Just like Fornius curbed Gravis' will aura, Orpheus destroyed Fornius' will aura. Fornius gulped deeply, but he didn't falter. "So what? He provoked me by releasing his killing intent while looking at me." Fornius got some courage back and spoke louder. "You would do the same in my case." Orpheus narrowed his eyes even further. By now, cold sweat was flowing down Fornius' back and his breathing became heavier. But surprisingly, Orpheus did nothing further. This was an excellent opportunity to teach Gravis. Orpheus turned to Gravis. "He is right, you know. You were constantly unleashing your battle intent. That's what we call a will aura, or killing intent. Normally, the will aura is only released when someone wants to fight someone else. By openly showing your battle intent, you basically shouted at him to fight with you." Gravis closed his eyes and sighed. Orpheus was right. By always killing weaker opponents, he forgot that he was still at the bottom. Gravis turned to Fornius and slightly bowed. "Thank you for the reminder, Fornius. And I apologize for my disrespect," Gravis said politely. Fornius harumphed, looked at Orpheus, and left grumbling. Orpheus watched Fornius leave and turned back to Gravis. "Your test will be different than the others." Gravis narrowed his eyes and his battle intent was building again. "Your test will be difficult." Gravis' will aura rose further. "We've never done this before, but I believe that you can manage." Orpheus smiled. Gravis looked into Orpheus' eyes and his aura reached his peak. "What will I fight?" Orpheus' smile changed to a smirk. "You'll fight a low-grade demonic beast." Gravis' will slightly shook, but returned even stronger. He had learned a lot in the last months, and wild beasts were among those things. He had only fought against ferocious beasts until now. The strongest among them could theoretically still be killed by people in the mortal realm, or with tempered organs and blood. Yet, low-grade demonic beasts were not ferocious beasts anymore. They were a grade higher, and people of the earlier mentioned stages were just food for them. With luck, someone with tempered skin could kill a low-grade demonic beast. Only if someone additionally tempered their muscles or bones could they securely win against such an opponent. Gravis knew this would be difficult. Orpheus nodded. "Good. Your will didn't falter and became stronger instead. Only like this can you hope to defeat your opponent." Orpheus took out a saber made of voidstone and threw it to Gravis. "You won't have time to pick up your weapon." By now, several youngsters already returned, exhausted beyond belief. They didn't even notice that Fornius wasn't here and just collapsed onto a wall to catch their breath. Orpheus and Gravis ignored them. "Go!" shouted Orpheus, and a portal opened. Gravis tightened his grip on his saber and walked silently through the portal. The scenery changed, and Gravis was back in the red cave. In front of him stood a 2-meter-high, golden lion. Its head looked down at Gravis, sizing him up. Gravis felt its pressure. None of his earlier opponents felt this powerful, yet his gaze did not falter and looked back into the lion's eyes. His will aura erupted and slammed into the lion. The lion felt threatened and roared. While Gravis was physically weaker than his opponent, his will aura was superior. The opponent didn't even have one. The lion had fought for its meal, but never fought an opponent that could threaten its life. Inside its forest in the lower world, it was king. None dared challenge it. Its mane stood up to intimidate its opponent, but it didn't work. Gravis knew that the initiative was important, so he immediately shot forward. The lion roared again and swiped with a claw. "Fast," Gravis thought and raised his saber to block. The paw smashed into the saber and Gravis flew back for about 5 meters. When he hit the floor, he rolled off with his back and managed to stand up again, before he even finished sliding. Gravis' arms shook. There was immense power behind that swipe, and the lion didn't even use its full body weight for that attack. He could not contend with its strength. The lion, encouraged by its own attack, ran to Gravis and swiped again. Gravis wouldn't fall for its speed another time and ducked under the attack while moving forward. He quickly raised his saber and slashed the lion's neck. Clank! His saber bounced back and his hands shook from the impact. Its mane felt similar to a steel wall. Gravis quickly rolled forward to dodge a paw that smashed down. Then, the lion tried to hit him with its back leg, but Gravis sidestepped easily while half crouching. He gripped his saber with both of his hands and stabbed upward, towards its torso. His saber only left a shallow cut. There was just some blood flowing out, but not much. Yet, the lion screamed in pain and jumped away, trying to hit Gravis in panic. Gravis had no issue evading such uncoordinated attacks and kept close to the lion, like a leech. The lion swiped again, but Gravis kept low to the ground and went under its elbow. With a sharp blow, he hit the inside of the lion's elbow while it was still swiping. The lion's attacks added power made the saber go in deep and even cut its tendon. The lion roared again and tried to jump back, but the cut tendon in its elbow only made the lion stumble back. Gravis didn't let up. He learned in his many previous fights that having the initiative was important. While the lion was recovering, Gravis stabbed his saber in its left eye. The lion seized and only managed to close its eyes before the saber penetrated it. The saber had destroyed the eye, but a saber was not made for stabbing, so it didn't majorly injure the brain behind the eye. The lion completely panicked and swiped its claws everywhere. Gravis kept his cool and kept himself to the blind side of the lion. He chopped into its side a couple of times and left some additional cuts. The lion realized in its panicked mind that no matter how fast it turned, it wouldn't be able to get Gravis in its sight like this. So it turned the other way. Gravis was just waiting for that and looked at the tail coming towards him, stretched by centripetal force. Gravis did a simple chop and severed the tail. Blood spilled, and the lion jumped away from Gravis, but in its panic, it forgot that its front paw was injured. It crashed to the floor and rolled onto its side. Gravis didn't pause and slashed the spot where front leg met torso. For humans, that would be the armpit. The fur was soft on that spot, and a lot of important blood vessels gathered there. More blood gushed, and after he did that, he jumped over the lion. Just when it stood up again, he stabbed its other eye from the side. The lion screamed and just fled into any random direction in panic. Boom! It blindly ran into the cave wall and bounced back, its mouth now broken. While lying on its side, it tried to roar, but only managed to whimper. Gravis quickly jumped to its front and stabbed his saber through a mutilated eye socket, right into its brain. The lion seized up, and Gravis finished the fight with a kick into the handle of the stuck saber. The saber cut deep into the lion's head, and the lion lost all its strength. Gravis watched the corpse, while his breathing was only slightly quicker than usual. This was too easy, he thought. The lion outclassed him completely in speed, defense, power, and probably also stamina, yet it died so quickly. After thinking for a while, Gravis finally realized the reason. The lion was inexperienced, he concluded. It had not bitten him a single time. It didn't even try to bite him. If it tried to bite him at the beginning, Gravis wouldn't have been able to get beneath it that easily. If he were to slide beneath its head, the lion could just swipe him with one of its paws. He wouldn't be able to evade that attack and would probably crash into the side of the cave. Some of his bones would break, and deep cuts made by its claws would appear. The fear the lion had stopped it from bringing its head anywhere close to its enemy. The head was the most important part of its body and needed to be protected. What if the enemy stabbed its eyes? Yet, those seemingly logical thoughts were the lion's downfall. It should have realized that its enemy would forfeit their life if they were to stab its eyes in that situation. A more experienced lion could have wiped the floor with Gravis. Gravis looked up to the ceiling. Was this what Brother Orpheus wanted to show me? That will in fighting experience could close the gap of realms? Gravis muttered to himself. Gravis was right, but will in fighting experience could only close the gap to a certain extent. If an opponent's body were so hard that he couldn't even break its skin, all the fighting experience in the world wouldn't help him. Yet, it dramatically increased his power in a fight. His Walura had suppressed the lion and made it act more cowardly. Without his battle-intense intimidation, the lion might have decided to bite him. Then only death would have awaited Gravis. Gravis sighed again, and in a purple flash, he vanished. Chapter 17, Beginning. Only a couple of seconds passed between Gravis left and returned. If one didn't pay attention, they wouldn't even have noticed him leaving and returning. The youngsters still sat at the walls exhausted. Some had noticed that Gravis had left and returned, but they couldn't care about that right now. Orpheus just looked at Gravis with a grin. Gravis didn't look exhausted or injured and walked back to Orpheus. Admit it, the fight was different than you thought, he commented with a smirk. Gravis only nodded. A strong will can suppress people and beasts with weaker wills. They will feel more afraid and will fight more defensively. Without an indomitable will to kill, you will be suppressed and can't show your full fighting strength. Some might not even be able to fight at all. Orpheus was speaking with a severe tone. This was important knowledge that Gravis had to learn. At some point in a cultivator's life, nearly everyone will have a Walura. Of course, that only counts for cultivators that fight for their own resources. Orpheus lifted a finger and pointed to the sky. For example, about 98% of our living siblings don't have a Wallora even though their strength is completely incomparable to yours. If any of our siblings without a Wallora fought someone a major realm lower than them, who had one, chances are that they would get mercilessly massacred. You can only increase your Wallora by battling others with similar strength to yours. So, someone with a strong Wallora has also fought lots of people with similar strengths. This means that a Wallora also shows their battle experience. Orpheus pointed at Gravis. In your cultivation realm, Walloras are extremely rare. Very few can find so many similarly strong enemies in such a short time. Orpheus' eyes narrowed. But you need to be careful. You might have gotten a start bonus with your fights, but if you don't keep honing your Wallora, you will lose that advantage. Let me give you a piece of honest advice. Your goal is not to become strong, but to become the strongest. If you want to reach your goal, you need pressure, real pressure. If you just raise your cultivation realm, you will start losing battles with enemies in your realm. And if you start losing battles, you will lose fights over resources you desperately need. This is exactly why the cultivation journey is so dangerous. You need battle strength to get resources that increase your battle strength. It's a cycle. As soon as your battle strength or resources diminish, your journey is likely to end. Either by not getting resources to rise in your realm or by dying. If you ever change your goal in life, you only need to stop looking for strength. Stagnant cultivators are no danger to other cultivators and are not enclosing on their resources, so they don't care. Gravis listened carefully. He had already known most of the things he heard, but the explanation helped him combine his scattered knowledge into a whole concept of strength. As strange as it sounded, he realized that enemies and cultivation resources were, kind of, the same thing. If you fight your enemies, your battle strength increases, and if you get resources, your cultivation realm increases. Both things would increase his strength, but one was obviously more dangerous than the other. Gravis bowed lightly to Orpheus to express his sincere gratitude. Thank you, brother Orpheus. I had already noticed that you had given me lots of resources in the form of enemies. Gravis looked deeply into Orpheus' smiling eyes to show his sincerity. You have given me the best possible starting point. So, when I am strong enough, I will repay everything tenfold. Orpheus laughed and patted Gravis' shoulders heartily. Don't mention it. We are family and family needs to stick together. I didn't do this to expect some return from you. I only wanted to help my little brother. Orpheus patted the side of Gravis' shoulder. Come on. Let's go drinking today. In 1 week, you will leave for a low-rank world. So, let's relax for a while. He pushed Gravis out the hall and followed him. The other youngsters didn't know what to do. Phornius wasn't here and Orpheus hadn't even looked at them. A week passed, and Gravis didn't train during that time. There was a high chance that this would be the last time he could see his family. He spent his days with his brother, father, and mother. They were all happy for him, even though his mother also showed worry. After all, Gravis was her child, and she wanted nothing more than for him to be happy. Yet, she had also shown him her full support in his journey. This week did wonders for Gravis' heart. In the last couple of months, he had sunk into a sea of bitterness and isolation. The realization that he would need to journey alone in the future had gnawed at him more than he thought. He had suppressed those feelings with ambition and rage, but that only held for so long. Eventually, the constant suppression would have killed his drive, and only emptiness would have remained. He finally realized that he wasn't alone. His whole family was absent of karmic luck, and they were all the same. His feeling of belonging increased. Gravis stood lonely in an office, looking at the middle-aged office clerk. It was a small office made out of stone, and nothing else could be said about it. The clerk noticed that someone had arrived, but didn't look up. Name? He asked, obviously bored. Gravis. Your full name, the clerk commented rudely. Gravis didn't know how to answer that. He didn't know his last name. He wasn't sure if he even had a last name. How was he supposed to answer that? I kind of don't know, he said unsurely. The clerk furrowed his brows. What do you mean you don't? The clerk looked up at Gravis with annoyed eyes. Then something caught his attention, and he looked at Gravis' ring. Now he understood. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. The clerk looked back down at his papers and began to write down multiple things. After a while, he looked back up. All right, all done, only one thing left. Which world? He asked. Then he grinned. Let me guess. You're going to an elemental world. Gravis only nodded. Of course you do. I would do the same thing with all that compatibility with the elements and stuff. He activated a small array formation on his desk, and a transparent screen appeared in the air. He clicked through some things. Any specific preferences? Gravis shook his head. The clerk shrugged. All right, then I'll just choose one at random. When Gravis heard that, A cold shiver ran down his back. No, wait. The clerk stopped and looked at him with confusion. Please, let me see the list. The clerk shrugged and turned the screen around. Gravis sighed in relief. That was close. If I let luck decide, I wouldn't even know how I died. Gravis went through the screen. It was already filtered so that it only showed unresearched elemental worlds. The leading theme of cultivation methods classified worlds. Worlds, where beasts reigned supreme, were called naturals worlds. Worlds, where people mainly cultivated with their weapons, were called battle worlds. Of course, there were more categories. Elemental worlds, as the name implied, were worlds where cultivators mainly relied on cultivating a specific element to increase their strength. Gravis quickly chose one, received a card, and walked to the portal hall. The hall was massive and grand with a 100-meter-long formation in the middle. A similar clerk was operating the central formation. Gravis handed his card over and the clerk opened a portal. Gravis drew his saber, which he had received from Orpheus. It was one of the standard Voidstone sabers. It would be useful in the body-tempering realm, but it would absorb all of his energy when he reached the energy-gathering realm. So, it was only useful until that point. He had to get a new one later down the line. With one last deep breath, Gravis stepped through the portal. Gravis chose an elemental world for two reasons. First, he had high elemental synchronicity. Second, his goal was the most ambitious goal in existence. He wanted to trample upon heaven, and the best way was to steal heaven's strongest weapon and use it for himself, the lightning element. He had seen how heaven only used the other elements to obstruct his father, while lightning was its actual weapon. If he could absorb or resist the lightning, heaven would lose its strongest weapon. If he wanted to trample upon heaven, then, Gravis spoke with ambition. Lightning is the only way. Chapter 18. Of course, Gravis materialized some meters above the ground. He immediately felt the absolutely smoldering air. Before he could even look at where he was, he started to fall. He quickly looked down into the brightly glowing lava below his feet. The very first thing he did when he realized in what situation he was currently in was panic. Then he realized that he should, theoretically, be able to survive this fall without any issue due to his elemental synchronicity. Though, he didn't want to try his elemental synchronicity in such a dangerous scenario. Well, I don't have any choice right now, he thought as he plummeted into the lava. It was hot, but not that hot. It felt more like a bath that was a little too hot for his liking. Yet, it was still manageable. He floated on the top for a while and looked around. He was in a humongous pool of lava. On the edge of said pool were towering walls of stone. Obviously, he was in a volcano. It surely was great luck that the portal dumped him on top of an active volcano. His exit point was chosen at random after all. Gravis sneered. At least I now know that heaven's luck doesn't take my elemental synchronicity into account, he said to himself. Of course, he would materialize over an active volcano. Wait, is it getting warmer? Gravis looked at the blinding lava and felt the heat rise. On top of that, the lava started bubbling at multiple places. Gravis' face whitened when he realized what was about to happen. Really? A volcano that is about to erupt? He immediately concentrated, and his body rose above the lava until he stood on top of it. Even though he had his elemental synchronicity, a blast this strong would distribute his corpse upon the surrounding couple of kilometers, to multiple places. He had to flee fast. No time to waste. And with that, Gravis was off. He ran as quickly as possible to the closest wall of stone. Earth element is also an element. So, theoretically Gravis put his hand on the wall and tried to move upward. Yes, it works. He shouted as his hand stuck to the wall. He quickly climbed up the wall like an insect, the lava below him getting more turbulent. Just when he jumped over the edge, the volcano exploded. The lava shot into the sky and the top of the volcano exploded outward. Huge rocks flew through the air, and one of them carried Gravis. Multiple bones in his body broke in the explosion, and if he hadn't had tempered organs and blood, he wouldn't be alive right now. He soared through the air on the rock and didn't look forward to the landing. The rock spun in the air with Gravis holding on for dear life. He tried to judge if the rock's side with him on it would land first, but the rock was spinning too quickly. It would depend on his luck. When Gravis had that thought, his eyes widened, and he immediately gripped the rock and moved along its surface. It was challenging, and his arms hurt. His broken bones didn't help. Just when he managed to reach the other side, his previous position struck the ground, and the rock bounced. Gravis pushed himself off and left the rock when it bounced. Chances were, his new position would accidentally hit the ground next. Gravis touched the ground after falling for a couple of meters, but a fall from this height was not dangerous to him. Yet, it was not pleasant with all his broken bones. Gravis didn't relax and looked towards the sky. Then he immediately jumped to the side. Shortly after that, another sizable rock struck his previous spot. Gravis caught his breath, looked at his previous spot, and sneered. "Of course," he said in disgust. He quickly looked to the sky again, but no more rocks seemed to come toward his direction. He finally had a moment of calm. He took a deep breath. Cree! He heard a loud screech and looked to its source. A 2-meter-tall, blue falcon was flying in front of the, now still, second rock. Under the rock was a broken tree, and if one looked closely, one could notice a slight amount of blood at the edges. The bird circled the rock and looked around in fury. It quickly spotted Gravis, a fire of rage in its eyes. "This is getting ridiculous," Gravis shouted as he gripped his saber. At least, he would have, but his saber had vanished. During all the commotion, the saber had left Gravis. It could be anywhere. The bird charged at Gravis, and he did another jump to the side. Lava was raining from the sky by now, but Gravis didn't need to care about that. When lava touched his body, it would just slide off like viscous water. The bird was too angry at the presumed killer of its kids and didn't realize the danger it was in right now. Lava could hit it at any moment and burn through its body. Yet, like a miracle, not a single drop of lava touched it. Bam! A huge chunk of lava, several meters wide, struck the earth beside them. The bird flew around it and chased Gravis, who was full-on running by now. In no time at all, it reached him again and tried to strike him with its talons. Gravis quickly blocked with his left arm, redirecting its force to one direction, and ran into the other. His arm received some deep cuts, but that was better than losing his life. He quickly realized that he couldn't flee from the bird, and without a weapon, he couldn't fight it, at least not in his current condition. It was a ferocious beast, so in normal circumstances, Gravis would slaughter it like a chicken. Sadly, without a weapon that would be impossible. He had to survive somehow. If his body was in top condition, he might be able to take down the bird even without his weapon, but healing his bones would take days. Suddenly Gravis got an idea. He changed direction and ran for the massive chunk of lava that fell down earlier. The bird followed him, but before it could reach him, he had already jumped into the lava. Lava wouldn't cool off that quickly, and it was slowly melting a hole in the ground. The bird angrily circled the lava, but couldn't get close. Just the surrounding heat could set its feathers ablaze. After a couple of seconds, Gravis poked out his head and looked at the bird. The bird flew at him and tried to claw him with its talons, but Gravis' head pulled back into the lava. In its rage, the bird had flown too close to the lava, and a couple of feathers already started burning. It quickly flew away and picked those feathers off. Gravis poked his head out again and sneered at the bird. This time, he would be the tortoise. Chapter 19. Tastes like chicken. Gravis and the bird looked at each other, one in smugness, the other in fury. Gravis had no intention of leaving anytime soon. He would stay in here until he had completely healed. "Just you wait, shitty bird," Gravis shouted at the bird, who just squawked back in rage. The bird kept squawking incessantly, trying to taunt Gravis out of the lava. But the more it showed its anger, the better Gravis felt. "Yeah, go die of frustration, shitty bird. Just wait until I'm healed, then I'll whoop your ass." The bird didn't understand human language, but it understood that Gravis was provoking it, so it only got angrier. It tried several times to reach him, but had to stop each time. A couple of times, some feathers even caught on fire and the bird had to put them out. With time it was slowly losing feathers, but it also managed to come closer. "Yeah, go pluck your feathers, shitty bird. Then I don't have to do it myself when I cook you." Gravis continued his provocation. Even though it didn't understand what he said, the bird got angrier. Its fury could blow up the sky. By now, the lava chunk had cooled slightly and had melted a several meters deep hole. The lava looked like a small glowing pond now. Gravis' head poked out of the top of the lava pond, like a growing watermelon. After a while, the bird couldn't take it anymore and made a major decision. It landed and started plucking out all its feathers. Every plucked feather hurt, but its anger suppressed the pain. "Yeah, go on, you idiot chicken. While you're at it, come over and cook yourself." The provocations never ended. This only fueled its rage and it increased its speed. After a couple of minutes, the bird was clear of feathers. It plucked the feathers on its head with its talons, leaving some gashes along the way. Its determination was astounding. The naked bird now walked over to Gravis, getting closer and closer. The air was still scorching, but at least the bird didn't catch on fire. The bird stopped in front of the lava pond and glared into Gravis' eyes. Gravis still had a smug look on his face. They continued looking at each other for some seconds. "Heck!" The bird pecked and Gravis' head immediately sunk. The beak of the bird didn't touch the lava. Being close and actually touching it was a huge difference. The bird had missed, and Gravis' head poked out again, still looking at the bird with a grin. The bird pecked again, but Gravis' head dodged. This continued for a while, like a variation of whack-a-mole. The bird started pecking faster, giving its best to catch Gravis, but he always dodged easily. Suddenly, when the bird pecked again, Gravis caught its beak. "Got you." And he pulled down. He could control parts of the lava, and when he started pulling, it wasn't just his strength, but the whole lava pond that pulled it down. The bird immediately splashed into the lava and screamed. The lava ran down its throat and burned its insides and outsides. It died very quickly. Some turtles hunted birds similarly. When a bird got too close, they would snap and grip a part of its body. Then, they would pull the bird underwater and drown it. Gravis said he would be the turtle this time, and he stuck to his word. When Gravis noticed that the bird had died, he immediately threw it out. He didn't want to burn his meal. He couldn't eat the center due to the swallowed lava, but the outside was still okay. Gravis sighed. Finally, for the first time in this world, he had time to relax. He looked around and noticed that he was in a forest which was on fire. Many trees had ignited due to the lava rain. In the distance, he could see the smoking remains of the volcano. It seemed like he had flown for multiple kilometers. He couldn't see or hear any more animals or beasts. They probably fled from the natural catastrophe. The sky had darkened from the smoke, and ash was starting to rain down. The dark sky, the ash rain, the burning forest, the lava pool, and the otherwise quiet forest reminded Gravis of the environmental challenges in the practical test. This would probably be how a fire challenge looked. His nerves relaxed more and started cooking the bird above the lava. Its feathers were already plucked, so that saved him a hassle. After a sumptuous meal, he went back into the lava pond and slept. He preferred the lava safety instead of the open forest, even though the forest was burning all around him. Nothing else of note happened when he slept. Gravis opened his eyes after a good sleep and noticed that it was very tough moving in the lava. It had started to harden into obsidian. He poked his head out and saw that only ash remained around him for several hundred meters. The floor and the sky were black. It looked like a world of fire and brimstone. "Man, heaven really doesn't care about collateral damage when dealing with me," Gravis noted as he looked around. His body had healed to around half of its peak condition. He decided to stay here for another day. It was safer in this hellscape since no beast would want to come here. When Gravis looked back at the hardening lava pond, he got an idea and jumped back in. He tried to control the lava as well as possible and saw some success in his plan. Since he had to wait for his body to heal anyway, he might as well waste some time on his idea. Only his head remained above the surface, and he stayed in that position for the whole day. Night had arrived, and a team of 4 people was walking through the remains of the forest. They wore green clothes and carried bows. Obviously, this was a party of hunters looking for resources. The party consisted of 3 men and 1 woman. The men were probably in their 30s, but the woman looked young. She only hit her 20 recently. "Are you sure we'll find something here, Sarah?" "There's only ash as far as the eye can see," one of the men commented. "Maybe it'll be better if we hunt in an actual forest and not this ash land." The man didn't sound rude but concerned. He wanted to find some beasts to hunt. The woman, Sarah, smiled slightly. "After a natural calamity, the elements will be in disorder. If we're lucky, we can find an opportunity in this wasteland, and this opportunity might finally turn our luck around. Even if we find nothing, we can at least say that we've tried." The other men sighed and continued looking. After walking for some time, they arrived at a clearing with fewer remains of half-burned trees. The clearing was exceptionally flat. One of the men raised his eyebrows. "What is that?" He pointed at the center of the clearing. The others looked over, and their eyes widened. A solitary head was sitting in the middle of a flat black platform. Its eyes were narrowed, and it felt like it was looking at them. When they looked into its eyes, they felt a cold shiver. "Why is there a head in the middle of a black platform in the middle of a forest?" One of the men commented while looking at Sarah. "Is this the opportunity you spoke of?" he asked unsurely. Sarah narrowed her eyes. This was too strange. This couldn't be natural. She hesitated, but finally gritted her teeth and started walking towards the head. The other men nervously looked at Sarah but followed with courage. The closer Sarah got to the head, the more she felt as if its eyes followed her. She arrived at the black platform and stopped. The head shouted before they could step on the platform. The party jumped back and felt like their spirits left their body. The head had spoken. What was going on? Sarah's heart raced, and her fight and flight instincts were screaming at her. Yet, she didn't retreat. It took all her courage not to flee. "What are you?" she asked. The head spoke in an imposing voice. "I'm an earth spirit." Chapter 20, One Request, One Wish. Gravis saw an opportunity in those hunters. Strength-wise, they were obviously not his match. He could judge that just by how they felt to him and their cheap bows. Also, they were walking around in a team of 4, which means that one of them can't take down a ferocious beast solo. Those hunters could solve a problem he currently had. The hunters looked at him with shocked expressions. They looked at each other and then back to Gravis. They waited for him to continue talking, but he remained silent. After a while, Sarah stepped forward. Earth Spirit, we request your assistance. Sarah bowed slightly. If you can help us, we will repay you with everything we have, she pleaded. Gravis still looked at them with imposing eyes, though it felt weird to him since he had to look up. If you complete one request of mine, I shall grant you one wish, he declared. Sarah looked worriedly at the others. Earth Spirit, what request should we complete for you? She asked worriedly. Somewhere in this land of ash, there lies a black saber. It is my spirit weapon, and someone stole it. Gravis narrowed his eyes in fury. They dared to steal my weapon, so I awakened the mountain of fire and buried them in flames. Find my saber and return it to me, and I shall grant your wish. The jaws of the hunters dropped to the floor. This earth spirit was the reason for the sudden eruption of the volcano. If they said something wrong, they wouldn't know how they died. Sarah looked at the others and they nodded grimly. This was dangerous, but also an opportunity. We can return you your weapon, but we can't guarantee it. People who dare to steal your spirit weapon must surely be strong, she said in helplessness. Gravis' expression turned to smugness. You don't need to worry about the thieves. They have attracted the curse of my weapon and must surely have already been turned to ash. His eyes narrowed again. Be careful when you find my spirit weapon. It is cursed and will slowly sap all energy in the surroundings. If you return it quickly, there shouldn't be an issue, but you must make haste. The hunters narrowed their eyes and nodded. All right, we will return your weapon, Sarah declared. Gravis would nod imposingly if he could. Sadly, the obsidian was in the way. Instead, he closed his eyes in an attempt to seem mysterious. The hunters looked at him and left, searching for his saber. When they vanished, Gravis smiled smugly. As if I would waste days searching for my weapon, he mumbled to himself. About half a day passed until the hunters returned. They arrived in front of him and Sarah took the saber from one of the men. She approached the obsidian platform and laid the saber down. She looked at Gravis in awe. You were right. The spirit weapon was stuck in the ground and only ash surrounded it. We couldn't find any sign of anyone. They probably met an unfortunate end. Also, I felt something being sucked into your weapon from the surroundings. We sincerely hope you will fulfill our wish. Oh, that woman can already feel energy? She is probably very talented, he thought to himself. When she laid the saber down, it sunk into the obsidian slowly until it was completely submerged. Earth and stone were also elements, but sucking something into the ground took considerable concentration. The saber moved slowly to his right hand under the obsidian. He gripped it tightly and felt some security. Gravis looked at Sarah. I am not like humans who lie and deceive. Speak. What is your wish? Sarah sighed in relief. Bandits have taken hold of our village. They demand food, wine, money, and women regularly. If we don't do something soon, our village will be empty, and then we fear that our life will end. Sarah fell on one knee and pleaded. Please save our village. She begged. Bandits? They may have some people with tempered skin. Though I am in the lower world, so they probably skipped tempering their organs and blood. I have also gotten stronger and more experienced. If the bandits were stronger, they wouldn't care about some village resources. I can do that, he thought to himself. He internally sighed in relief but didn't show it. If they had requested something more challenging, he could only disappoint them. Luckily for once, they demanded something manageable. So it shall be. You have returned my spirit weapon, so I will grant you your wish. Step back, for I will rise. Gravis shouted. The hunters quickly retreated to a 10-meter distance of the obsidian platform. Any movement of the earth spirit could cause their demise. The obsidian platform started quaking and cracking apart, and the surroundings of Gravis' head began to rise. A body-wide pillar rose until it was as high as an average human. Then it broke apart, showing what was beneath it. The hunters' eyes widened when they saw an imposing black armor surrounding Gravis' body. It was completely black like the obsidian and seemed to absorb light. It covered his whole body from neck to toe without any seams. It was almost like the armor formed around him naturally. In Gravis' right hand was his saber, while he carried an imposing helmet in the other. This was the idea Gravis got a day before. He could move the lava around, so he tried to give himself an armor. He kept the lava pool and his armor separate so they wouldn't stick together when they hardened. It was a resounding success. It cost him a lot of time and concentration, but it was worth it. Gravis put the helmet on his head and used a lot of concentration to make it fuse to his armor. He stood imposedly in front of the hunters. They couldn't see anything of his body except for his eyes, which seemed to emanate a cold killing intent. All the hair on the hunter's body stood up in fear, but they remained rational. The earth spirit said it would help them with the bandit problem. Bring me to those bandits, he demanded. His voice sounded muffled behind the helmet and there was not much room for his mouth to move. They shall taste death. Chapter 21 Bandits. Gravis walked behind the group of hunters. His armor was one solid, so it was really difficult moving his legs and arms. He constantly had to concentrate on keeping the obsidian flowing. It was draining, but he also realized that it helped him temper his will. The hunters in front of Gravis were nervous. They felt Gravis' Willora. They didn't know what a Willora was, but they still felt it. It felt like a wild beast trailed them, waiting for a chance to strike. Gravis kept walking in silence. He wanted to know more about the world and any essential towns or cities nearby. Sadly, he had to remain mysterious, so he didn't initiate a conversation. He needed to wait for them to start one. We will arrive in our village in about 2 hours. The bandits should come tomorrow. That's the best opportunity to strike them, Sarah said after hours of silence. Gravis was happy that he could finally talk. There will be no issue. When they arrive tomorrow, I will bestow death upon them. Gravis sneered, but the others couldn't see it. That the bandits exploit your village shows their weak will and power. They heard Gravis' disdain, but kept quiet. Even if their village was weak, it was still their home. They didn't like someone calling their home weak. Yet, they knew that they lived in a different world than the Earth Spirit. Sarah continued, "You should not underestimate them. They have 3 people with tempered skin. Our village, in comparison, only has 2, my father and me. If you stop one, we can fight equally." Gravis felt relief. They only had 3 people with tempered skin. I said, "I will bestow them death, and I will keep my word." "You only need to watch," he commented. "If those bandits are so strong, why wouldn't they attack a bigger human settlement?" Sarah laughed dryly. "You must be joking. A town has, at least, 1 individual with tempered skin and muscle. They wouldn't even know how they died. A city would be even scarier. The head of a city must have a fully tempered body, or they wouldn't be able to be the head of a city." Finally, Gravis got some information about this world. There was no mention of energy-gathering realm cultivators yet, so this was probably an area far away from the core of power of this world. He estimated that he could kill anyone with tempered skin. It didn't matter if they had also tempered their organs and blood or not. If the enemy didn't have a strong will, he might even be able to kill someone with tempered muscles. He had killed a low-rank demonic beast once, and those can only be killed by people with tempered muscles, usually. Yet, with his luck, there might be an issue with those bandits. He had to be careful. The party continued to walk and arrived outside the village after 2 hours. It wasn't very big. From one end to the other, it spanned about 100 meters. The village was comprised of simple wooden huts, and all the villagers were outside their houses. The men looked relieved when they reached their home, but Sarah furrowed her brows. The villagers are all outside. This seems unusual, unless she realized what might have happened and turned white. The bandits arrived early. She shouted and sprinted into the village. If the bandits arrived, and she wasn't there as intimidation, they might go beyond their usual rules. The men also blanched and quickly ran after her. Gravis watched her leave and finally got an opportunity to do something he wanted to do for a long time. He started slowly changing his armor to actually have joints. All this sloshing around of the armor was really draining him. After some seconds, he did some jumps and saw no more issues. Sarah just went beyond the village border and continued to run into the middle. Gravis cracked his neck to relieve some tension and also sprinted to the village. Even though the obsidian armor was heavy, he ran just as quickly as Sarah. When he went beyond the village border, he saw a wall of villagers blocking his way. They weren't looking at him, but into the village center, where Gravis could hear a loud commotion. Gravis continued running, his steps incredibly loud due to his obsidian armor. The villagers heard the commotion behind them and turned around. There, they saw an imposing black armor charging at them. They screamed and jumped to the side. The villagers further in front heard the screams, turned around, and also quickly jumped to the side. A clear street appeared where Gravis charged, and he could finally see what was happening at the center. About 10 people in leather armor, carrying short iron swords, watched in smugness, as 3 people fought Sarah and a middle-aged man. Sarah was fighting with 2 of them, while the middle-aged man fought with another one. The middle-aged man was already severely injured and bled from multiple cuts across his body. He probably had to fight off all 3 of them at the beginning. "Haha, what an opportunity you have given us, girl. We have weakened your father, and now even you won't be able to stop us," shouted one of the men fighting Sarah, while wearing a wide grin. "Today, you will warm our beds." Sarah gritted her teeth, but didn't say anything. The bandits on the side started hearing loud, metallic footsteps and looked to its source. They saw a madly charging, black armor running to one of the bandits fighting Sarah. They didn't know what to do, but one extraordinarily courageous man jumped in front of Gravis and slashed his sword at him. Gravis slashed the sword and continued charging. Bang! The sword broke upon hitting the saber, but that was not the end. Gravis charged through the man, breaking all his bones and throwing him several meters away. With the armor's ridiculous weight and his speed, he had built up a lot of power. Charging through the man only slowed him down a little bit. The fighters heard the boom and turned to Gravis, but they were so engrossed in their fight that they didn't notice Gravis until he was already upon them. Gravis formed a fist and used all the accumulated power of his charge to punch the man who spoke with Sarah earlier. The man noticed Gravis too late, and the fist hit the side of his head, the obsidian exploding from his fist. The man's skin only got a bruise, but his skull and brain were utterly destroyed. The corpse shot into the distance and completely destroyed a wooden hut. Sarah's eyes widened, and the bandits blanched. Gravis knew that the initiative was important, and didn't wait for a single second longer to start his second attack. He used the saber in his other hand to attack the other person fighting Sarah. The man quickly held up his sword to block. Bang! The sword broke since it was only a mortal iron weapon. Gravis was using a saber made out of void stone. It wouldn't be useful in the energy gathering stage, but it was incomparable to iron swords. The saber tore through the sword and cut deeply into the side of the man's torso. The man was shocked and couldn't believe what just happened. Since joining the bandits, he never was in this kind of battle, where the enemy outclassed him. Gravis saw his hesitation and immediately acted. He reared back and punched the back of his saber, which went deeper into the bandit and severed his spine and organs. A final kick to his saber completed the job and bisected the bandit completely. The bandits to the side looked in shock, while the bandit, fighting the middle-aged man, turned and retreated. The man realized his chance and grabbed the bandit, and since the bandit was in a panic, he couldn't defend himself properly. The middle-aged man took the bandit's arm and threw him over his shoulder, right at Gravis. Gravis saw this and didn't decline. He raised his saber as high as he could and used his full strength to chop. A full-powered attack couldn't be used in an even fight since the enemy could avoid the long-winded attack or just counterattack in the wind-up phase. The bandit did not have this chance. Gravis chopped down with his full power, and his saber lodged itself into the middle of the bandit's head, after going through his brain. The corpse was stopped in the air, and slid down the stuck saber, leaving a long line of blood and brain. Gravis turned to the bandits on the side. When the bandits saw him turn to them, all their hair stood up, and they fled out of the village. At least, they would have, if the villagers, angry from all the torment the bandits brought, weren't blocking them. They tried to push through, but the villagers held firm. One bandit took out his sword, but before he could do anything, he was cut in half by a black saber. The bandits couldn't defend themselves, and Gravis took their lives as quickly as possible. He might not pity his enemies, but he didn't want to see innocents getting hurt because of him. He finished the bandits quickly, and the villagers looked in fear at the monstrosity which just committed a bloodbath. The middle-aged man stood protectively in front of Sarah while she sighed in relief. After standing still for some seconds, Gravis turned to Sarah and shouted, "Your wish has been fulfilled." Chapter 22, Stagnation. The villagers looked at Gravis with fear, unsure if he would slaughter them next, while the middle-aged man looked at him with a stern look. Sarah walked around the man and towards Gravis. The man wanted to stop her but decided that she probably knew what she was doing. Sarah arrived in front of Gravis and looked down at his hand. The armor on his hand had broken and showed his skin. Sarah smirked slightly. "So, you were human after all," she lightly commented. Gravis followed her gaze at his arm and noticed that his armor had broken. He wasn't sure how to react since he went all in on the earth spirit thing. Yet, he didn't know how to continue his disguise. Sarah chuckled lightly. "Don't worry. I was pretty sure that you were human when you said you were an earth spirit. Elemental spirits don't appear in human form. Also, if you were actually that strong to make the volcano explode, then why would you need our help to get your spirit weapon?" She couldn't see it, but Gravis' face went completely red under his helmet. He was going all out with his disguise, but he didn't know that he never fooled Sarah. He was basically a clown dancing in front of her. Gravis searched desperately to find a way to save his dignity. The middle-aged man slowly pieced together what had happened. The earth spirit had scammed the hunters, telling them that he was an earth spirit. While the men didn't like scammers, he acknowledged that Gravis saved the village, so he wanted to help him. This situation was probably very embarrassing for the earth spirit. The man couldn't see Gravis' face due to the helmet, but he was sure that Gravis' face was entirely red right now. The middle-aged man walked to Gravis. "It doesn't matter what you are, but you have saved our village. For that, I must thank you sincerely." The man bowed deeply. "If there is anything we can do to repay this debt, please tell us." Gravis felt like the man had given him coal in a cold winter. He silently cleared his throat. "I have repaid your help, and all debts have been paid. I shall leave now," Gravis shouted imposingly and turned around. He walked away but stopped suddenly. He turned around. "Where's the next town?" The man smiled wryly. The nearest town is Wilderness Town to the northeast. It is about a day's march away from here. Gravis nodded and quickly fled from the village. He didn't want to remain any second longer since it was just too embarrassing. Sarah looked at his fleeing back and laughed. The middle-aged man put his hand on her shoulder. "You shouldn't humiliate our savior." She laughed more. He started with all this bullshit. He could have just said he was human in the first place. When we found him, he was buried in obsidian, only his head sticking out from the middle. Sarah talked with her father and told him all about their interaction with Gravis. Gravis was running to the northeast. He had already thrown away his useless armor a while ago. It looked nice but was useless otherwise. Now, he only wore a black shirt and some black pants. He finally got a direction for a town, and there, he could surely buy pills to temper his body. He learned in his preparation school that the body tempering stage was mainly dependent on pills. Finding a different way to temper one's body was difficult, especially in a low-rank world. He could theoretically temper his skin by training, but that would take years. While running, he was thinking about what happened to him in this world, up to now. He had arrived, and his luck was doing its absolute very best to kill him. Yet, after that, there was silence from his lack of karmic luck. He met no enemies in the 2 days where he was regenerating, and the enemies he sought out himself weren't even worth a warm-up. What did heaven plan? Gravis thought further about this issue. His lack of karmic luck did its best to stop him from cultivating. There were 2 ways to stop someone in their journey: either kill them or stagnate them to death. Those ways were actually complete opposites. One was sending strong enemies to kill the person, while the other one was sending no enemies. Enemies tempered one's will and heart, and if there were no enemies, one could progress higher in their realm. Yet, if they advanced higher in their realm without having any enemies, they would also be the weakest in said realm. And when you were the weakest in your realm, it would be difficult to survive and get further resources. Gravis clenched his teeth. "So that's your plan," he muttered to himself. "As a backup of your volcano plan, you dumped me into some backwater area, where nearly everyone is weak. There are nearly no potential enemies and probably just as few resources for cultivation." That's right. Heaven wanted to stagnate him into complacency. He got dumped into an area where he was as strong as the leader of a whole town. If Gravis hadn't learned so much about heaven's luck and plans from his brother Orpheus, he would slowly fall into complacency and lose his drive. This was the same way heaven stopped Orpheus from cultivating. It gave him a wife and beautiful children until he stopped desiring strength. Gravis realized the similarity. Just when Gravis always lamented his weak strength, heaven had sent him to a place where he was one of the strongest. That sudden shift in status could make people drunk on the sudden gain of power. Like that, they lost their feeling of helplessness, which drove them to reach higher realms. It would also remove all pressure on a person, basically boring them into mediocrity. What a sly and sinister scheme, Gravis commented as he thought about his situation. He couldn't allow for his drive to vanish. He had to get pills to temper his skin and then move on towards areas with stronger people. Gravis stopped running. "And this town should help me in that," he muttered to himself as he looked at the town on the horizon. After a short pause, he continued running. He was still quite a distance away from the town when something happened. "Halt!" A man suddenly jumped out of a bush and stepped into Gravis' way. "I planted these trees and paved the road." Pay a toll to Bang. The bandit couldn't finish his sentence as Gravis just barreled through him, throwing him back into the bush. Gravis didn't even look at him as he continued running. After a while, the man got up from the bush and looked into Gravis' direction. "Damn, at least let me finish my phrase before you do that," he grumbled to himself. "It's normal and good manners to let other people finish speaking, you dick." Gravis tried not to think about the guy he just ran over. This was one of heaven's attacks, sending weaker people toward him until he felt more and more powerful. If he continued fighting only weaker people, at some point, he would lose his edge and would start fearing stronger enemies. Gravis needed to keep his will sharp. If he felt proud about winning against weaklings, his will would get exhausted to death. The longer he remained in this weak place, the more weaklings would come, and the more his will would falter. He had to leave fast. Chapter 23. Weapon. Gravis closed in on the town and slowed down. Charging full speed into a town could evoke adverse reactions. Gravis might need enemies, but attacking a town full of innocent people was just wrong. The town had a 5-meter-high, gray wall surrounding it. The big gates in front of Gravis were only open so wide that a human could barely squeeze through them. The 2 guards beside the gate looked at him and noticed the saber on his back. They raised their halberds and shouted, "Halt! Why are you carrying a weapon?" Gravis stopped and looked at them. "Because it's dangerous outside," he plainly explained. The guards became a little more relaxed when they heard that, but still kept up their vigilance. "We can't let you through with that weapon," the guards said imposingly. Gravis furrowed his brows. If these were the town's rules, He had to comply, but only on one condition. Is that true for everyone entering the town? He asked. If this were only true for ordinary citizens, then nobles and people with connections would still be able to carry their weapons. People with strength had the power, and he didn't want to bet on the possibility that no one wished to take his life in the town. In order to carry a weapon in the city, you require a certain amount of status, and we know all people with status. We must apologize, but we can't let you through like this, the guards continued. One of the guards looked up at the wall and waved one of his hands. The gates promptly closed completely. Gravis narrowed his eyes at the guards and released his Walora. The guards felt the world turn colder, and they believed they saw an illusory blade resting on their throats. They started having trouble breathing and faltered. Mortals had no resistance to Gravis' will. I am going into this town, Gravis stated, and all the hair on the guards' necks stood up. Gravis slowly walked forward. It was their duty to stop him, but they just couldn't summon the courage. They watched as Gravis passed between the two guards, not looking at them at all. Gravis arrived in front of the gate and placed his right hand on it. He pressed forward with all his strength, and the gate slowly started opening. The guards' faces whitened, and they retreated a couple of steps. Only someone with tempered muscles could open the gate by hand. They hadn't even tempered their skin, so how could they possibly stop such an existence? Of course, Gravis didn't have tempered muscles, but his organs and blood had been tempered for over 15 years. His physical strength was incomparable to an average human. His power could not reach the level of someone with tempered muscles, but it was strong enough to open the big gate. This gave the guards the illusion that Gravis had tempered his muscles. Their town lord was the only individual in the town with tempered muscles, so they didn't dare say anything to Gravis anymore. They let him pass in silence. After Gravis left their sight, one of the guards looked up at the wall at another guard with a white face. Go inform the town lord, he commanded. The guard straightened, looked at his commanding officer below, saluted, and ran into the town. The other guards released a sigh of relief. They felt like they had touched death. Yet, they realized that they had failed their duty. The punishment would be severe. Gravis looked around the town. It had wide streets, and most of the buildings consisted of stone. It was definitely better than the village he was in before. Many people crowded the streets, but when they saw that Gravis was carrying a weapon in the open, they gave him a wide berth. People with weapons were either noble or affiliated with the underground. Gravis continued walking until he arrived at an open plaza. He could see a lot of stalls placed all around the square. They peddled different wares. He saw people offering everything from medicinal herbs to martial arts. The only thing that wasn't being sold were weapons. It was probably illegal. Gravis went up to a stall that sold medicinal herbs. He could see a long queue, went to the back, and stood in line. The onlookers looked at him unsurely. Gravis was carrying a weapon openly, so his status couldn't be ordinary. Yet, he stood obediently at the back of the queue of a stall. This felt unreal to them. One of the onlookers walked to the person in front of Gravis and nervously tipped his shoulder. The person felt annoyed and looked at the guy who poked him. The guy just beckoned at Gravis with his eyes. The man in the line turned to Gravis, saw his weapon, and stepped back. He then gestured for Gravis to move in front. While doing that, he also gave the man in front of him a light kick to his calves. The man turned, saw the scene, and also moved back. This spectacle continued until Gravis was at the front of the queue, everyone else standing behind him. The stall owner looked at Gravis with a mixture of delight and nervousness. What does sir require? He asked, very politely. Gravis looked at him with his, by now, usual serious look. Where can I buy pills for skin tempering? The stall owner felt bitter. It seems like there was no money to be made here. He pointed at one of the stone buildings adorning the plaza. This is the medicinal pill pavilion. All pills in the town are sold there, he explained politely. The building was bigger than most of the others. It had 3 floors and the walls were painted in a festive, red color. An ostentatious sign showed the building's name, Medicinal Pill Pavilion, written with graceful strokes. Gravis nodded at the stall owner and walked to the building. The other people at the stall sighed in relief as Gravis left. In comparison, Gravis felt bitter. Everyone is subservient. If I were not used to this subservient attitude, I would start feeling smug. I'm lucky that everyone in my home city treated me like this. Oh heaven, what a dangerous scheme, he thought. Gravis went into the medicinal pill pavilion and didn't see any people, except for a girl behind the counter. Probably not everyone could have the finances to buy pills. There were no display cases for pills, and the store looked rather barren. The girl was around his age and stood behind the counter with a straight back. He walked over, and the girl, who already took note of his weapon, politely curtsied. Welcome to the medicinal pill pavilion. How can I help you? What do I need to buy skin tempering pills? He asked directly. The girl smiled. One skin pill costs 7.5 gold coins. Gravis narrowed his eyes. The girl felt a little afraid but didn't show it. But since it is sir that is shopping here, we can sell them for 7 gold coins. Gravis didn't narrow his eyes because of the price, but because he realized something. He didn't have any money. Chapter 24. The Town Lord's Action. So, he said he is coming into the city, and then Lieutenant Henders just let him walk through the gates? An imposing man sitting on a throne inside a big hall asked. He was looking at a soldier, kneeling in front of him. The soldier was the same one that had been sent to inform the Town Lord. The man on the throne was obviously the Town Lord. He was the only individual inside the town with tempered muscles. Your Majesty, I was on top of the wall, and when the man said that he would come into the city, I felt like a blade was resting on my throat. The lieutenant and the other guard knew what the punishment for failing our duties was. Yet, no matter how hard we tried, we could not step forward to obstruct him. He then opened the gates and walked into town with his weapon, the guard continued. The Town Lord's eyes narrowed. He opened the gates? Suddenly, he stood up. Idiot! Why didn't you mention that the gates were closed sooner? The Town Lord shouted. The guard shivered. I apologize a million times, Your Majesty. This little one forgot. The guard whimpered. The Town Lord wandered around his throne hall, unsure how to proceed with this situation. Only people with tempered muscles could open the gate. On top of that, the guards knew very well that failing one's duty meant death. This meant that the fear the guards held toward attacking the young men outweighed the fear of certain death for failing their duty. This young man was, at least, as strong as him. This could be an issue, if not handled correctly. Did the young man introduce himself? The Town Lord asked while looking outside of his window into the town. No, he just asked if everyone had to follow the weapon prohibition. We told him that it concerns everyone who was not of a certain status. Then he said that he was going into the town, pushed open the gate, and walked in. The guard narrated again. The Town Lord rubbed his chin in thought. Announcing his status would have made things way easier. Either he is a wanted criminal, which I doubt since he didn't hide, or he is unknown. Maybe he is a disciple from some mysterious master. He didn't announce himself, so he is probably not interested in meeting me or interested in my position. Yet, he is a young man, probably in his teens judging by how the guard described him. He must have some incredible treasures with him. Maybe I could get them, and finally temper my bones. The Town Lord looked at the ceiling and continued rubbing his chin while muttering to himself. After a while, he nodded to himself and made his decision. The guard continued kneeling, not daring to say a word. All right, the Town Lord shouted while turning back to the guard. The guard stood up and saluted. The soldiers will not receive the death penalty since this seems to be an unusual circumstance. Yet, punishment is necessary. Return to the gate. Everyone involved in this incident will receive 40 hits of the skin rod after their shift ends. The guard shivered slightly. The skin rod was a specific rod to punish people with tempered skin. The lieutenant would survive, but he would lose a layer of skin, while the guards would have to fight for their lives. The guard saluted again. Yes, Your Majesty, shouted the guard and left. The Town Lord sat back on his throne and began to drink some tea. He had decided to let sleeping tigers lie. If the young man were not interested in meeting him, he would probably do what he came here to do, and then leave. The young man was at least as strong as the Town Lord himself, and the fear he instilled in the guards seemed unnatural. He never even heard of something like that. Angering him could go south, very fast. The potential treasures were not worth the risk. As for the situation that the young man would do something illegal or kill someone, the Town Lord would not risk his life for that. Just let him do what he wants, as long as it does not compromise my position. The Town Lord wasn't an idiot. Having no money was an issue. Body tempering needed a lot of money in the form of pills to progress. The following stages were easier in that requirement. Gravis had to find a way to earn money. However, it shouldn't be that hard. Being one of the strongest in the area would surely help. Alright. So Gravis began, and the girl's eyes lighted up. She was about to make lots of money. What's the best way to earn money around here? Gravis asked. The girl wasn't sure if she heard him correctly. The best way to earn money, sir? She asked for confirmation. Gravis nodded. The girl felt the money glide out of her hands. This guy had no money. But then, how did this guy walk around with a weapon? Some guesses started forming in her mind. If Kesher's status weren't the way he got his saber in, then it could only be strength. Maybe she actually could make some money off of him. Actually, she started. There is a place where Sir can earn a lot of money. Oh? Where? Gravis asked. The girl's eyes shined. The man was obviously, genuinely interested in making money. We have a big problem with ferocious beasts and demonic beasts in the surrounding villages. The hunting guild has a lot of bounties and missions for killing different beasts. Of course, one needs a certain amount of strength for that, but I think this would be no problem for Sir. Sir can find the hunting guild outside the town. Gravis' eyes lighted up. Making money for killing enemies? Money could increase his realm, and enemies could increase his will and experience. This was killing two birds with one stone. Gravis nodded. Thank you. I will look for this hunting guild and return with enough money. Then he turned around and left. Sir, one more thing, the girl shouted while he was leaving. Gravis turned around and looked at the girl. I think there is a notice on the notice board on the central plaza that sir should be interested in, the girl said. Gravis furrowed his brows but nodded and left the store. The girl, on the other hand, rubbed her chin with a smirk. If she were right, she would earn a lot of money in the near future. Following the girl's advice, Gravis looked for a notice board and found it quickly. He walked towards it, everyone giving Gravis a wide berth, and began to read the announcements. After a while, Gravis found an announcement that made him shiver in excitement. It read, to all talented youngsters on the day before the summer solstice, the yearly entrance exams for the elemental guilds are being held. Requirements. Under 20 years of age, must have tempered skin, must have a firm will. Every youngster that fulfills the requirements is invited to Body City to participate in the entrance exams. Further down was a list of all the elemental guilds, and he noticed the Lightning Guild was part of them. He quickly checked the date on the top right of the notice board. The date for the entrance exams was about 90 days away. Gravis narrowed his eyes. He had to temper his skin by then. He quickly turned around and left the town, looking for the hunting guild. Chapter 25, Senior Hunter. Gravis walked to the exit of the town. When the guards saw him, they simply opened the gate without a word. They had orders from the town lord that Gravis could do anything he wanted, but the guards had to keep the town lord up to date with news about him. When Gravis went through the gate, one guard retreated and ran to the town lord's residence. Gravis noticed that and guessed that the town lord probably had eyes on him. He didn't care that much. If the town lord wanted to attack him, he would be an excellent test of Gravis' current combat strength. If the town lord didn't do anything, that would be fine too. Gravis left the town and searched for the hunting guild. After a while, he found it. It was to the east of the town, while the gate Gravis left from was on the south. It was a wide building made of stone, and he could see a big sign on the roof that read Hunting Guild. Gravis could also see stalls on the side of the hall, where some beasts walked around, which were probably tamed. He could only see ferocious beasts and no demonic beasts. Demonic beasts were perhaps too strong. Gravis went to the entrance and walked in. The hunting guild had no guards, apparently. They probably didn't need them since the hunting guild was full of strong hunters. Wanting to rob this place was pure suicide for most people. When he went inside, he noticed that the hall also functioned as a bar. Long rows of wooden benches and tables adorned one side of a large hallway, while the other side had the bar. At the end of the hall, there was a giant notice board. That was probably the place where the bounties and missions were listed. Hey, newbie! A guy shouted from one of the benches, a beer in front of him. You want to register as a hunter or do you want to set up a mission? He asked as he stood up and walked to Gravis. The guy looked imposing. He was around 2 meters tall, and bulging muscles peeked through his brown vest, with nothing underneath. A large sword, nearly as long as the guy himself, was slung over his back. Gravis looked at him with his typical neutral look. I want to register as a hunter, he commented dryly as he continued looking around the hall. The hall seemed moderately full, but there was still some space. Nearly everyone had some kind of weapon on their backs, since this was outside the town. There were no restrictions regarding weapons out here. He could see all kinds of weapons adorning the hunter's leather armors. He could see bows, staffs, swords, sabers, spears, and many more. The guy whistled in surprise and astonishment. Oh, you're a little young for that. Are you sure about this? You need to be able to slay a ferocious beast, at least, the guy explained. Gravis simply nodded. He didn't want to get too close to others due to his contagious luck. The guy simply shrugged, while leaning with his elbows on a nearby table. Another man sitting at that table looked at the guy with a disgusted look and pulled his food away from the guy's elbow. The guy talking with Gravis ignored it. Well, it's your neck. You need to get over to the counter and register. The guy gestured with his neck to the bar. Gravis nodded. Thanks, and walked to the counter. The guy looked at Gravis, walking away. Ha, a shy guy, eh? With that, he walked back to his table to continue drinking his beer. As Gravis arrived, a middle-aged, grump-looking woman looked at him. Here no one was intimidated by his weapon, since the hunting guild was outside the town. Here everyone walked around with a weapon. What do you want? Asked the woman, annoyed. Gravis didn't care about her manners. He preferred direct conversation. If someone were friendly to Gravis, he would feel uncomfortable and guilty since he had to act coldly. He didn't want to infect others with his luck. I want to register as a hunter. To become a junior hunter, you need to find a party that will accept you, and kill at least 4 ferocious beasts until you can accept missions by yourself. To become a senior hunter, You need to have tempered skin and must prove yourself by killing a ferocious beast solo, the lady narrated like it was practiced, which was probably true. Gravis didn't wait. I want to become a senior hunter, he stated blankly. One of the lady's eyebrows rose. Kid, don't joke around. You're still too green to become a senior hunter. You probably haven't even killed a chicken before, the woman laughed in disdain. Gravis narrowed his eyes at the woman. Just when he was about to release his Valora to make things easier, an old man on the side of the counter walked over. Margaret, you don't have the authority to stop people from registering. Give him the test, he ordered. The lady rolled her eyes and started rustling through some paper below her counter. After some seconds, she took out a piece of paper. Here, she threw the paper at Gravis, who promptly caught it. A ferocious beast called Tree Fiend has been spotted near a farm to the south. Just follow the instructions of the paper. If you manage to kill it, bring its corpse here. If it's too heavy, bringing us its head will be enough, but you won't get any spoils except for the monetary reward. Gravis calmly looked at the paper, read through it, and nodded. He shoved the paper into one of his front pockets, turned around, and left without another word. TCH, another crazy youngster thinking he knows how the real world works, the lady commented in disdain. The man, on the other hand, was rubbing his chin with a smile. I wouldn't be so sure about that. I felt something unique from him, the man told the lady. TCH, you're getting sentimental. If the boy dies, that's on you. The lady angrily remarked and went back to look through some documents. Gravis quickly left the hall and ran towards the south. He followed the instructions and arrived at a farm, not 20 minutes later. After asking the farmer about his beast problem, he ran to the east of the farm to a close forest. The farmer saw the Tree Fiend there some hours ago. He had commissioned the hunt about 2 weeks ago, but since he didn't have enough money, he could only commission it as a trial mission. A trial mission only cost about a third as an actual mission. Like the name suggested, trial missions were meant for hunters as a trial to upgrade their rank. There were multiple ranks, with junior hunter and senior hunter being the lowest and the highest, respectively. There were not many people with tempered skin just walking around, so the hunting guild created some additional ranks for the hunters without tempered bodies. Just, those ranks were not accessible to new recruits. A hunter could only start at the bottom or the top. If they told someone with tempered skin that they first had to slog through all the ranks, they might not join. They had tempered skin, after all. They could just go somewhere else. Gravis arrived at the place where the farmer last saw the Tree Fiend. It was close to a forest on the edge of the farm. That was the place where the farmer let his animals out to eat. Of course, that would seem idiotic with a ferocious beast stalking the area. Yet, the farmer was afraid that, if the creature didn't find any food there, it would come to the farmer instead. Gravis jumped into a haystack and waited for the Tree Fiend. He knew the basics of tracking, but why would he risk going into the forest and searching around forever if he could simply wait for the beast to appear on its own? So, he decided to simply wait. About 5 hours later, he saw an about 2-meter-tall, tree-like creature stalking around the forest's edge. Its arms were thin and ended in long, thorn-like barbs. It was also walking on only 2 legs. This was probably the Tree Fiend. Fitting name, Gravis commented in his mind. The Tree Fiend didn't know that death had arrived.